During New Year's dinner, my wife's father threw red wine in my face. My wife's sister laughed, saying, "Thanks, Dad. Maybe that'll teach him some respect." Filthy pig. I felt my hands grip the chair. I stood up and made one phone call. They had no idea who they were dealing with. True story. The red wine was cold when it hit my face. That's the detail I remember most clearly. Not the shock, not the gasps around the table, not even the sound of crystals shattering against the marble floor. Just the cold, expensive Bordeaux, chilled to exactly 55 degrees, streaming down my forehead into my eyes, soaking through the collar of the white shirt I'd ironed that morning with such pathetic, hopeful care. I had wanted to make a good impression. Even after 3 years of marriage to Claire, even after 1,000 small humiliations at these family gatherings, I still showed up with pressed clothes and a smile that felt like a mask I'd forgotten how to remove. Hope, I've learned, is a slow poison. It keeps you coming back long after any reasonable person would have walked away. The dining room of the Whitmore estate, and yes, they called it an estate. Never a house was decorated for New Year's Eve with the kind of understated elegance that screams old money. White roses and crystal vases, candles that cost more than most people's weekly groceries, a table that could seat 20, but tonight held only 8. Richard and Patricia Whitmore at the heads, their daughters Claire and Madison with their respective partners, and Richard's brother Thomas with his new wife, whose name I can never remember because she changes every 18 months like clockwork. I was seated, as always, at the far end, not quite at the table, but not quite excluded. The geographic representation of my place in this family. The evening had started like all the others. Patricia's air kisses that never quite touched my cheeks, Madison's eyes sliding past me as if I were furniture, Richard's handshake, firm enough to be painful, brief enough to be dismissive, and Claire, my wife, my partner, my supposed ally in this theater of casual cruelty, already 3 glasses deep into the wine, laughing too loud at her father's jokes, her hand never quite finding mine under the table. "So," Richard had said during the appetizer course, fixing me with those ice-chip eyes that had probably closed 1,000 business deals. "Claire tells me, you're still at that little tech company. What was it called again? Pixel something." "Pixel Dynamics," I said, keeping my voice even. "And yes, sir, still there." He cut into his scallop with surgical precision. 3 years now, isn't it? Most people move up or move out by then. Which category are you in?" I felt Claire stiffened beside me, but she said nothing. She never said anything. "I'm actually heading up a new division," I offered, hating how the word sounded like an apology. "We just secured a major contract." "A major contract," Madison interrupted, her voice dripping with the kind of amusement people reserve for children's magic tricks. "Let me guess. Low 6 figures. Maybe breaking into 7 if you're very, very lucky." Her husband, Bradley or Brantley or something equally prep school, snorted into his wine glass. "Madison," Patricia said, but it was the kind of admonishment that really meant, "Not at the dinner table, dear. We have guests," as if I weren't sitting right there, as if I were somehow both present and invisible. I should have left then. Looking back now with the clarity that comes from distance and devastation, I can see exactly where I should have stood up, thanked them for dinner, and walked out into the December night with whatever dignity I had left. But I didn't. Because I loved Claire. Because I believed that love could somehow bridge the chasm between her world and mine. Because I was a fool. The main course arrived. Beef Wellington, because of course it was. And the conversation moved on. They talked about the ski trip to Aspen, the new yacht Richard was having custom-milled in Monaco, Madison's promotion at her father's company, a position she'd been groomed for since birth, a throne inherited rather than earned. Thomas droned on about his portfolio performance, dropping numbers like they were meant to intimidate rather than inform. I cut my beef and said nothing. I'd learned this technique over the years, how to make myself small, how to shrink into the spaces between their sentences, how to exist without taking up too much room. It's a survival skill, really, like an animal playing dead. You know what I admire about you? Richard said suddenly, turning his attention back to me like a spotlight I never asked for. Your persistence. Most men in your position would have gotten the hint by now, would have realized they'd married above their station and either risen to the occasion or had the grace to step aside. The table went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of people enjoying a meal, but the charged silence of spectators waiting for blood. "Dad?" Claire said finally, weakly, the word barely more than a whisper. "What?" Richard spread his hands in mock innocence. "I'm paying the boy a compliment. It takes a certain kind of man to accept being supported by his wife's family. No shame in it, really. Someone has to marry the money." I felt my jaw tighten, my hands beneath the table curled into fists that I forced myself to relax. Breathe. Count to 10. These were the mantras I developed, the little tricks to keep the anger down, to keep the humiliation from showing on my face. "I don't accept support from Claire's family," I said quietly. "We have our own income." "Oh, please." Madison leaned forward, her eyes glittering with something that looked almost like joy. "You live in a condo Dad bought. You drive a car from the family fleet. You're wearing a watch that Claire bought you for Christmas because God knows you couldn't afford it yourself. Face it, you're a kept man. At least have the dignity to own it." "Madison, that's enough," Claire said, but her voice had no force behind it. It was the voice of someone going through the motions, performing the role of loyal wife without actually meaning any of it. I looked at her, then really looked at her 3 years of marriage, and I was seeing her clearly for maybe the first time. The way she wouldn't meet my eyes, the way her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her wine glass, the way she seemed to shrink into her chair, caught between her family and her husband, choosing silence as the safest option. When had she stopped fighting for me? Or had she ever fought at all? "You're awfully quiet tonight," Richard continued, warming to his theme like a cat with a mouse. "Usually you at least try to defend yourself, getting tired or just finally accepting reality." "I think," I said carefully, each word measured and precise, "that there's a difference between accepting reality and accepting disrespect." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Richard set down his fork slowly, deliberately, the kind of gesture men like him have perfected, the prelude to power being exercised, to lessons being taught. "Disrespect," he repeated, tasting the word. "You think you're being disrespected? You who showed up at my daughter's door with nothing but student loans and dreams. You who I've housed and fed and tolerated for 3 years despite every instinct telling me you're nothing but a leech in a cheap suit." "It's Hugo, boss," I said, immediately hating myself for taking the bait. "Outlet store," Madison sang out. "I can always tell." Richard stood up, 6 feet 3 inches in of old money and older anger, his face reining in a way that probably should have worried his cardiologist. "You want to talk about respect? Respect is earned. Respect is built through accomplishment, through legacy, through actually contributing something to the world beyond your mediocre little 9-to-5 existence. You think marrying my daughter entitles you to respect. You think showing up here, eating my food, drinking my wine, sitting at my table gives you the right to lecture me about disrespect?" I should have stayed quiet. God, I should have just nodded and apologized and survived the evening like I had survived all the others. But something in me, maybe it was the wine, maybe it was 3 years of accumulated humiliation, maybe it was just the simple human need to be seen as more than a punching bag. Something in me broke. "No, sir," I said, standing to face him. "But being your son-in-law does entitle me to basic human dignity. And that's something I haven't seen much of at this table." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the candles seemed to stop flickering. Richard's face went from red to purple. His hand, still holding his wine glass, began to shake, not with age or weakness, but with rage so pure it was almost beautiful in its intensity. "You little..." And that's when he threw it. The wine arced through the air in slow motion, a crimson wave catching the candlelight, almost beautiful if you ignored what it represented. It hit my face with enough force to snap my head back slightly. Cold. So cold. Dripping down my nose, my chin, soaking into my Hugo Boss outlet store suit, pooling on the white tablecloth like evidence at a crime scene. The glass followed, missing my head by inches, shattering against the wall behind me with a sound like a small explosion. For a moment, one perfect, crystalline moment, nobody moved. We were a tableau, frozen in the aftermath of something that couldn't be taken back. Richard breathing hard, his fist still raised. Patricia with her hand over her mouth. Thomas looking anywhere but at me. Claire staring at her plate as if the pattern on the china held the secrets of the universe. And Madison. Madison threw her head back and laughed. It wasn't a polite laugh or an uncomfortable laugh. It was genuine amusement, pure and delighted. The kind of laughter that comes from watching someone get exactly what you think they deserve. "Thanks, Dad," she managed between giggles, her voice pitched high with Schad and Freude. "Maybe that'll teach him some respect. Filthy pig. Filthy pig." I felt my hands grip the back of my chair. The carved mahogany was solid under my palms, real, something to anchor me to the moment because everything else felt like I was floating above the scene, watching it happen to someone else. I stood up slowly, wine dripping from my hair, my face, my clothes, forming a small puddle at my feet on their imported Italian marble. I reached into my pocket, my inside jacket pocket, the one that held my phone, and everyone flinched, except Richard. Richard just stared at me with something that might have been satisfaction. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it with hands that were steady despite everything, found the number I needed in my favorites. My thumb hovered over the call button for just a second, one last moment to consider the consequences, to think about what I was about to set in motion. Then I pressed it. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, a voice answered, professional, crisp, ready. "It's time," I said, my voice calmer than I'd heard it in years. "Execute the plan. All of it." "Confirmed," the voice replied. "It's already in motion." I hung up, slipped the phone back into my pocket, looked around the table at the faces staring at me. Confusion, contempt, curiosity, and in Claire's case, something that might have been the first flicker of fear. "What the hell was that?" Richard demanded. "Who are you calling? Your lawyer? Your therapist? Your mother to cry about how mean we are?" I smiled. Not a big smile, just a small upturn of my lips. The kind of expression that contains knowledge and patience in equal measure. "You wanted to know if I'd move up or move out," I said quietly. "I chose option 3. You just don't know it yet." I walked toward the door, my shoes leaving wine-red footprints on their perfect floor. Behind me, I could hear Madison's laughter dying out, replaced by confused muttering, Claire's voice calling my name. Finally, too late. Patricia asking Richard what I meant, what was happening. I didn't look back. At the door, I paused, turned one last look at the family that had spent 3 years teaching me that I wasn't good enough, that I'd never be good enough, that my place was to be grateful for their tolerance and quiet in the face of their contempt. "You know, I said you should have asked more questions about where I came from, about what I do, about who I really am, but you were so certain you already knew everything worth knowing. That's the problem with people like you. You think money makes you smart. It doesn't. It just makes you comfortable. And comfortable people get sloppy." "What are you talking about?" Richard's voice had lost some of its certainty. I pulled a handkerchief from my pocket, silk, monogrammed, a gift from someone they'd never met, and wiped the wine from my face. The gesture was deliberate, almost theatrical. I wanted them to see it, to remember it. "You'll find out," I said, "probably around 9 a.m. tomorrow when the markets open. Maybe sooner if any of you check your phones before midnight. Happy New Year, Richard, Patricia, Madison, Bradley, or Brantley, Thomas, and you, and Claire." I saved her for last, my wife, the woman I'd loved enough to endure this. She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks, and for a moment, just a moment, I felt something like regret. But then I remembered how she'd sat there silent while her father threw wine in my face, while her sister called me a filthy pig, while her family treated me like something they'd scraped off their shoes. Love, I was learning, has limits, even mine. I walked out into the December night, leaving the door open behind me. Let the cold air rush in. Let them feel for just a moment what it's like when the warmth leaves and you're left with nothing but the chill. My car was waiting at the end of the drive, not a family fleet vehicle. My car paid for with money they knew nothing about, bought with credentials they'd never bothered to verify, registered under a name that wasn't quite the one they knew me by. I got in, started the engine. The clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until midnight. 13 minutes until the new year. 13 minutes until everything changed. I pulled out my phone again and sent a single text message. Confirmed. No mercy. The reply came back immediately. Understood. The dominoes are falling. I smiled again, wider this time, alone in the dark where no one could see it. Then I drove away from the Whitmore estate, their lights growing smaller in my rearview mirror until they disappeared completely, swallowed by the winter darkness and the future they couldn't see coming. They had no idea who they were dealing with, but they would. God, they would. The highway was empty at midnight. I drove north, away from the estate, away from Greenwich and its manicured lawns and its old money silence, toward the city that glittered on the horizon like a promise of anonymity. The wine had dried on my face, sticky and uncomfortable, but I didn't stop to clean it off. Not yet. I wanted to feel it a little longer. The physical reminder of what had happened, the residue of their contempt. Some scars you need to carry for a while before you can set them down. My phone started ringing at 11:52 p.m. Claw's name lit up the screen, her photo smiling at me from a time when I still believed we were building something together. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. Voicemail again. Voicemail. On the fourth call, I answered. "Don't," I said before she could speak. "Whatever you're about to say, whatever excuse you've rehearsed in the last 5 minutes, whatever explanation your family has crafted, just don't. Please come back." Her voice was small, fractured, the voice of someone who's just realized they might have broken something that can't be fixed. "We need to talk about this. You can't just leave like that. You can't just make some cryptic phone call and disappear. What did you do? What did I do?" I laughed, and even to my own ears it sounded wrong, too sharp, too bitter, like glass breaking. "Claire, your father threw wine in my face. Your sister called me a filthy pig, and you sat there. You sat there like a statue, like someone carved out of expensive marble, and you said nothing. I tried. You whispered, 'Dad, once like that was supposed to be enough. Like that was you standing up for your husband.' Silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing, could imagine her sitting in one of the estate's many rooms, probably the library where she went when she wanted to feel close to her father's approval, surrounded by leather-bound books nobody read, and portraits of ancestors who'd built their fortune on railroads and real estate and the careful exploitation of people they considered beneath them. 'He was drunk,' she said finally. And oh, the pathetic hope in those words. He didn't mean it. He never means it when he gets like this. You know how he is on holidays. I know exactly how he is. I cut her off. I've known for 3 years. What I'm only realizing now is how you are, who you are when it matters. That's not fair. Fair? The word tasted like poison. You want to talk about fair? Let's talk about fair, Claire. Let's talk about every dinner party where I was the punchline, every family gathering where I was treated like the help, every single time your father made it clear that I wasn't good enough, would never be good enough. And you just smiled and changed the subject. I was trying to keep the peace. You were trying to keep your, inheritance. The words hung between us like smoke. I'd never said it before, never even let myself think it clearly. But there it was, the truth that had been hiding in plain sight for 3 years. That's not true, she whispered, but we both knew it was. I love you. You love me enough to marry me, not enough to defend me. There's a difference. I could hear voices in the background now. Richard's voice, loud and demanding. Madison's laugh, always. Madison's laugh. Patricia trying to calm everyone down with her performative concern that never quite translated into action. Where are you? Claire asked. Just tell me where you are and I'll come meet you. We can talk about this like adults. We can fix this. Adults, I repeated. You want to know what adults do, Claire? They ask questions. They pay attention. They don't just assume they know everything about the person they married because that person is quiet and accommodating and doesn't rock the boat. What are you talking about? I pulled off the highway into the parking lot of a closed gas station. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting everything in that particular shade of artificial brightness that makes the world look like a stage set. I put the car in park, but left the engine running. Did you ever Google me? I asked. Really? Google me? I mean, not just my name, but dig deeper. Look past the first page of results. Of course I did. When we first met, you found my LinkedIn, my Facebook, maybe my Instagram if you were thorough. You found exactly what I wanted you to find, what I needed you to find. Her breathing changed. Faster now, fear creeping in around the edges. What does that mean? It means, I said slowly, watching a rat scurry across the parking lot in the darkness, that you married someone you didn't really know. Someone you never bothered to really know because knowing would have required effort and questions and possibly discovering things that didn't fit into your family's narrative about who I was supposed to be. You're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. Your whole family should be scared because in about 8 hours when the business day starts, things are going to start happening. Things that can't be stopped or reversed or smoothed over with money and lawyers and the kind of casual power your father thinks makes him untouchable. What things? What did you do? I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, wine-stained, exhausted. But there was something else there too. Something I hadn't seen in years. Clarity. Purpose. The face of someone who'd finally stopped pretending. I made a phone call. I said, "That's all." One phone call to one person. Everything else, that's just consequences. The natural result of decisions your family made a long time ago. You're not making sense. I'll make sense tomorrow. I promise. Everything will make sense tomorrow. For now, just stay at the estate. Stay with your family. You're going to need them. Are you coming home? Home. The word felt foreign, like trying to speak a language I'd once known but had forgotten through disuse. I don't think we have a home anymore, Claire. I think we've been living in a building, sleeping in a bed, going through the motions of marriage without any of the substance. And I think I've finally woken up from whatever dream made me believe otherwise. Please. I hung up, turned off my phone completely, watching the screen go dark. The sudden silence was profound, almost religious. Just me and the hum of the engine and the buzzing of the gas station lights overhead. How long had I been performing? How many years had I spent being the person they expected me to be, needed me to be, wanted me to be? The struggling tech worker, the grateful son-in-law, the man who'd married above his station and should spend every day thankful for the privilege. Let me tell you about performances. Let me tell you about the difference between who you are and who you pretend to be, and what happens when those two versions of yourself live so long in the same skin that you forget which one is real. I was 23 when I sold my first company. Not Pixel Dynamics, that came later. A carefully constructed front, a plausible cover story for a man who needed to be underestimated. No, my first company was a data analytics firm that I'd built in my dorm room at MIT, running on borrowed servers and caffeine, and the kind of manic energy that comes from knowing you found something real. I sold it for $47 million. I was 25 when I sold my second company, a cybersecurity firm that had quietly contracts with 3 governments and a dozen Fortune 500 companies. That one went for $230 million. I was 27 when I started my third venture. This one I didn't sell. This one I kept, grew, nurtured like a garden of very specific and very powerful plants. It's called Silverline Ventures. You won't find it on any public stock exchange. You won't see it mentioned in Forbes or Fortune. It exists in the spaces between other companies, a holding firm that owns pieces of everything from pharmaceutical patents to rare earth mineral rights to the software that runs half the financial trading platforms in North America. Current estimated value north of $2 billion. My personal net worth at last count was somewhere around $800 million. And Richard Whitmore, successful Richard, powerful Richard. Richard with his custom yacht and his Aspen ski trips and his casual contempt for anyone he considered financially inferior. Richard was worth maybe $200 million on a good day, and most of that was tied up in real estate and his company's declining stock value. I could have bought him his company, his estate, his whole carefully constructed empire. Could have done it with a phone call and a wire transfer and still had enough left over to never think about him again. But I didn't want to buy him. I wanted to teach him. There's a difference. I met Claire at a charity gala, one of those black tie events where the wealthy gather to congratulate themselves for donating a fraction of their net worth to causes they'll forget about by morning. I was there because one of my portfolio companies was being honored. She was there because attendance at such events was for families like the Weitzers as mandatory as breathing. She was beautiful. That's not a revelation. Beautiful women are common enough in those circles. She was also kind, or seemed kind in a way that felt rare and precious in a room full of calculated smiles and strategic conversations. We talked about art, about travel, about her work at a nonprofit that advocated for arts education in underfunded schools. She seemed genuinely passionate, genuinely engaged with something beyond the usual concerns of her social class. I found it refreshing, attractive, real. "And what do you do?" she'd asked sometime during our second glass of champagne. I'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times with other people, this careful dance of revelation and concealment. But with Claire, for some reason I still don't fully understand. I decided to try something different, something like honesty. "I work in tech," I said, which was true. "Data analytics and venture investment." "Oh, what company?" And here's where I made my choice, my mistake, my fatal error in judgment. "A few different things," I said vaguely. "Right now I'm consulting with a smaller firm, helping them expand. Nothing glamorous. Lots of code and coffee and late nights." It wasn't exactly a lie. I did consult. I did work late nights, but it was a lie by omission. A truth told at an angle that reflected a completely different image. I told myself I wanted to be sure she liked me for me, not for my money. I told myself I was being prudent, protecting myself from gold diggers and opportunists. I I told myself a lot of things that sounded noble and wise, and were actually just fear dressed up as strategy. The truth, I was tired. Tired of being valued only for my net worth. Tired of relationships that felt more like mergers and acquisitions. Tired of wondering if anyone would care about me if I lost everything tomorrow. So I became someone else. Not completely. I kept my name, my background, my education, but I filed away the wealth, the success, the power. I became a smaller version of myself, someone who could be loved without complication, without the weight of expectation and calculation. I became the man Claire thought she was marrying, the man her family thought they were tolerating. And the really twisted part? It worked. She fell in love with me, or fell in love with the version of me I was showing her, which amounts to the same thing. We dated for a year, got engaged, married in a ceremony at the estate that cost more than most people make in 5 years, paid for entirely by Richard because, of course it was, because I was supposed to be grateful for their generosity. I never corrected them, never said, actually, I could buy this whole wedding 10 times over. Never pulled back the curtain on who I really was. I told myself I would eventually when the time was right, when I was sure. But the time was never right, and I was never sure. And somewhere along the way, the lie became comfortable, easier than the truth, safer than being seen, until tonight, until wine in my face and laughter and filthy pig and Claire's silence, until I realized that being loved for a lie is worse than not being loved at all. I started driving again around 1 a.m. north into the city toward the apartment they didn't know I owned in the building they didn't know I'd bought 3 years ago as an investment property and a hedge against exactly this kind of moment. My phone, still off, sat in the passenger seat like a dead weight. I knew what would be waiting when I turned it back on. More calls from Claire, angry voicemails from Richard, maybe even a carefully worded message from Patricia trying to smooth things over with her particular brand of passive-aggressive diplomacy. But there would be other messages too, from Marcus, my actual business partner, and the voice I'd called at dinner, from my lawyers, from the people I'd hired months ago to investigate the Whitmore family finances, to find every loose thread and weak point in Richard's carefully constructed empire, from the journalists who were even now receiving anonymous tips about insider trading, tax fraud, and a dozen other financial irregularities that Richard had thought were buried deep enough to never surface. You see, when you have the resources I have, when you have access to the kind of information networks and forensic accountants and former federal investigators that money can buy, you can find almost anything. Every hidden account, every questionable transaction, every place where legal shades into illegal and confidence becomes fraud. It had taken 4 months. 4 months of quiet investigation while I smiled through family dinners and accepted their contempt and played the role of the grateful, struggling son-in-law. 4 months of documentation and verification in building a case so airtight that no amount of Whitmore money or influence could make it disappear. And tonight, with one phone call, I'd released all of it into the world. Not to me, not to anyone who could be connected to me, but to the SEC, to the IRS, to 3 different news organizations known for their investigative journalism, to competitors who would be very interested in the information, to shareholders who deserved to know what their CEO was really doing with company funds. I'd done it quietly, carefully, with the kind of precision that comes from understanding that revenge, real revenge, isn't about spectacle. It's about inevitability. By 9 a.m. tomorrow, Richard Whitmore would be fighting fires on a dozen different fronts. His company's stock would be in freefall. Federal investigators would be requesting meetings. His board of directors would be calling emergency sessions. And he still wouldn't know it was me. Not yet. Not until I wanted him to know. The apartment building rose up before me, glass and steel and security that could rival a small fortress. I pulled into the underground garage past the spaces for the other residents. A hedge fund manager, a news anchor, someone who worked in fashion whose name I always forgot. My spot was in the back next to the elevator. Private, secluded, safe. I sat in the car for a long moment, engine off now, listening to the tick of cooling metal and the distant hum of ventilation systems. My hands, when I looked at them, weren't shaking. I'd expected them to shake, expected some physical manifestation of what I'd just done, what I'd just set in motion. But they were steady, calm, the hands of someone who'd finally stopped pretending. I got out, took the elevator to the 23rd floor, let myself into the apartment that still smelled like the expensive candles the cleaning service lit to make the space feel lived in, even though I was rarely here. The city spread out below my windows, a galaxy of lights and lives and stories. Somewhere out there in Greenwich, the Whitmore family was probably still awake, still trying to understand what had happened at dinner, still trying to decide if I was bluffing or crazy or actually dangerous. They'd find out soon enough. I walked to the bathroom, finally confronting my reflection in the full-length mirror. The wine had dried into my skin, my hair, my shirt. I looked like someone who'd been in a fight and lost. But I didn't feel like I'd lost. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I'd won something. Not the war that was just beginning, but the first battle, the one you have to win with yourself before you can fight anyone else. I peeled off my ruined clothes, let them fall to the marble floor, stepped into the shower and watched the water run red, then pink, then clear as it washed away the evidence of their contempt. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, they would learn the truth. Tomorrow, quiet revenge would become loud justice. But tonight I was just a man in a shower, washing off wine in humiliation, preparing for war. And I had never felt more awake. I didn't sleep. Sleep felt like surrender, like closing my eyes would somehow undo what I'd set in motion or give me time to second-guess decisions that were already echoing through digital networks and secure servers across 3 time zones. So I sat in the leather chair by the window, Italian leather, obscenely expensive. The kind of chair Richard would have approved of if he'd known I owned it, and watched the city transition from night to dawn. There's something almost holy about that hour, that gradual shift from artificial light to natural, when the sky bleeds from black to navy to that particular shade of gray that promises either sunrise or storm. The buildings across the street started coming alive around 5 a.m., lights flickering on in apartments, the early risers beginning their routines, runners on the street below, their breath visible in the December cold. Normal people doing normal things, completely unaware that somewhere in Greenwich, a family's empire was beginning its slow, inevitable collapse. I thought about calling Marcus. My phone sat on the side table, still off, a black rectangle of potential communication that I wasn't quite ready to activate. Marcus Chen, MIT, classmate, business partner, the closest thing I had to a friend in a life I deliberately kept small and contained. He'd been with me since the beginning, since those dorm room days when we thought we could change the world with code and conviction. He was the one who'd argued against the Claire situation from the start. "You're playing a dangerous game," he'd said 3 years ago, sitting in the same apartment drinking scotch that costs more than most people's monthly rent. Lying by omission is still lying. And the bigger the omission, the bigger the explosion when the truth comes out. "I'm not lying," I'd insisted. "I'm just being selective about what I share." "You're pretending to be poor to a family of rich people who already think they're better than everyone? You don't see how that's going to end badly? Maybe it won't end at all. Maybe this is just who I am now." Marcus had looked at me with something between pity and frustration. "Nobody gets to be two people forever, James. Eventually, you have to choose which version is real." James, my actual name, not Jim, which is what Claire called me, not Jimmy, which is what her family had somehow decided was appropriately diminutive. James Alexander Hawthorne, though I'd shortened it to James Hathaway in most of my public-facing documents, a small change that made Googling me significantly more complicated. James Hawthorne owned Silverline Ventures and sat on 4 corporate boards and had a Wikipedia page that was mostly accurate if you ignored the parts about my personal life. James Hathaway worked at Pixel Dynamics and drove a sensible car and lived in a condo his wife's family had bought and apparently deserved to have wine thrown in his face. Marcus was right. You can't be 2 people forever. The question was, which person was I, really? The one I'd been before Claire, or the one I'd become for her? The sun finally broke the horizon around 6:47 a.m. I watched it happen in real time. The way the light changed the entire character of the city, turning glass towers into mirrors and shadows into definition. Beautiful and impersonal. The sun doesn't care about your drama. It rises anyway. I turned on my phone at 7 Hulk. Exactly. It took 43 seconds to come alive, and when it did, it exploded with notifications. 67 missed calls, 114 text messages, 23 voicemails, and still counting as more came in. The phone buzzing like an angry insect in my palm. I ignored all of it and opened my secure email instead, the one linked to my real identity, my real business, my real life. 3 messages from Marcus, time-stamped throughout the night. 12:47 a.m. It's done. SEC has everything. They're moving faster than we expected. Expect news by market open. 3:23 a.m. WSJ is running the story at 6 a.m. Times has it for 7. You really went nuclear on this. No turning back now. 6:15 a.m. Call me when you're ready to talk about next steps. Also, you okay? Stupid question, probably, but still. You okay? Was I okay? I stood up, walked to the window, pressed my forehead against the cold glass. Down below, the city was waking up fully now. Coffee shops opening, taxis prowling for fares, people rushing to jobs and lives and problems that probably felt enormous to them, but were in the grand scheme of things manageable, fixable, normal. I just destroyed a family. Not physically, not violently, but methodically, precisely, with the kind of cold calculation that you only achieve when you've been pushed past the point where mercy feels like weakness and forgiveness feels like defeat. Was I okay? No, I said out loud to the empty apartment. But I will be. The Wall Street Journal article went live at 6:03 a.m. I read it on my tablet while drinking coffee that I'd made too strong, the bitter taste matching my mood perfectly. Whitmore Industries under federal investigation. Allegations of insider trading, tax fraud spanned decades. They'd buried the lady with professionalism and restraint, but it was all there. Every transaction I'd flagged, every questionable stock trade that Richard had made using information from his board positions, every offshore account, every tax shelter that crossed the line from aggressive planning into outright fraud. The article cited anonymous sources and documents obtained by the Journal and ongoing federal investigations. It was careful, legally vetted, unassailable, the kind of journalism that wins Pulitzer Prizes and ruins lives in equal measure. I read it twice, checking for any detail that might trace back to me. Nothing. The investigation appeared to have come from the SEC itself, triggered by routine audits and vigilant regulators. The documents could have come from anywhere. A disgruntled employee, a whistleblower, a competitor. No one would think to look at the quiet son-in-law who worked at a small tech company and couldn't even afford his own car. By 7:15, the story had been picked up by Bloomberg, Reuters, CNBC. By 8 o'clock, it was trending on financial Twitter. By 8:30, Whitmore Industries stock, which wouldn't start trading until 9:30, was already facing a deluge of sell orders in pre-market trading. I watched it all unfold with a strange detachment, like watching a movie I'd written but wasn't actually starring in. This was my doing. My revenge, my careful, calculated destruction of a man who thought he was untouchable. So why did I feel so empty? My phone started ringing at 8:47 a.m. Claire's number. I let it ring through to voicemail, then listened to the message. Jim. Oh my God, Jim. You need to see what they're saying about Dad. It's all over the news. They're saying he committed fraud. They're saying he's going to be arrested. The lawyers are here. Everyone is freaking out. Where are you? Why aren't you answering? I need you. Please, please call me back. Her voice was ragged, torn, the voice of someone whose entire world was falling apart in real time. Part of me, the part that had loved her, that maybe still loved her, wanted to call back, wanted to comfort her, wanted to be the husband she needed in this moment of crisis. But I didn't, because she'd never been the wife I needed when I was drowning in humiliation at her family's table. The next voicemail was from Madison, and it was exactly what I expected. You son of a... I don't know what you did or how you did it, but I know this is you. You did something. You said something. This is because of last night, isn't it? Because Dad lost his temper because he put you in your place and you couldn't handle it. You pathetic little man. You're going to regret this. Do you hear me? You're going to regret this. I smiled despite myself. Madison was smart enough to suspect, but not smart enough to prove anything. And anger, righteous anger, makes people stupid. Makes them lash out instead of thinking strategically. Makes them call and leave threatening voicemails that could be used as evidence if things got really ugly. Not that I planned to use them. This wasn't about legal battles. This was about something more fundamental. The third voicemail was from Richard himself. His voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Smaller, older, within the edge of panic that 3 glasses of wine and absolute certainty usually kept at bay. I don't know what you think you know or what you think you've done, but you need to call me immediately. Immediately. We need to talk about last night. I may have been out of line. We can discuss this like rational adults. There's no need for whatever this is. Call me. There it was. The closest thing to an apology Richard Whitmore was capable of giving. May have been out of line. Not I'm sorry, not I was wrong, just the vague acknowledgement that perhaps throwing wine in someone's face wasn't ideal behavior. Too little, too late, and for the wrong reasons entirely. I deleted all 3 voicemails without responding. Let me tell you about the investigation. 4 months ago, I'd hired a firm called Redstone Analytics. They specialized in forensic accounting and corporate intelligence, the legal kind, mostly, the kind that corporations use on each other all the time. Background checks on potential acquisitions, due diligence on merger targets, finding skeletons before you get into bed with someone. I'd given them a simple assignment: find everything there was to find about Richard Whitmore and Whitmore Industries. Everything legal, everything questionable, everything that lived in that gray area between aggressive business practice and outright crime. What's the scope on this? The lead investigator had asked during our first meeting. A woman named Sarah Chen, no relation to Marcus, with 20 years at the FBI before going private. Are we looking for anything specific? Everything, I'd said. Assume he's dirty and prove me right. That's a dangerous assumption. Confirmation bias can skew an investigation, then prove me wrong. Either way, I want the truth. She'd looked at me for a long moment, those sharp investigator's eyes seeing more than I probably wanted to show. This is personal. Does it matter? Only in terms of what you plan to do with the information. If you're looking to blackmail him, I'm not. I'm looking to expose him. If there's something to expose. And if there isn't, then I'll have paid a lot of money for peace of mind. There was something, Of course, there's always something when you dig deep enough into anyone's finances, especially someone who's been playing at the level Richard had been playing for 40 years. The question isn't whether you bend rules. Everyone bends rules. The question is whether you break them, and how badly, and whether you can hide it well enough to avoid consequences. Richard had broken them badly, and he'd hidden it well enough to avoid consequences for decades. Until now, the investigation had uncovered a pattern of insider trading going back 15 years. Board positions at 3 different companies that he'd used to make strategic stock trades just ahead of major announcements. Not huge trades, Richard was too smart for that, but consistent ones, small enough to fly under the radar, large enough to add up to millions in illegal profits. They'd found offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell corporations in Delaware and Panama, a web of financial structures designed to minimize tax exposure in ways that crossed from clever planning into outright fraud. They'd found evidence of bribery, of kickbacks, of contracts awarded based on relationships rather than merit, with money flowing back through those same shell corporations to Richard's accounts. It was, in Sarah's professional opinion, enough to put him away for 20 years if federal prosecutors decided to throw the book at him. Will they? I'd asked. Depends. If this becomes public, if there's pressure, if the evidence is solid enough that they can't ignore it, yeah, they'll have to. The SEC doesn't like being embarrassed, and rich white men who think they're above the law make excellent examples. And if it becomes public anonymously, if it appears to come from a whistleblower or a routine audit rather than a targeted investigation, she'd smiled then, a thin smile that acknowledged what I was really asking. Then it's just the wheels of justice turning. Nothing personal, just consequences catching up to behavior. Just consequences, I'd repeated. That's all revenge ever is, really. Consequences delivered by hand instead of by fate. At 9:30 a.m., the market opened. I watched on my laptop multiple screens showing different data feeds. Whitmore Industries stock price appeared, $4,723 per share, down from $73.15 as at yesterday's close. A 35% drop in the first minute of trading. Then it kept falling. By 9:45, it was at $30. By 1:01, trading was halted due to volatility concerns. By 10:30, when trading resumed, it had dropped to 30W. I did the math in my head. Richard's personal holdings, roughly 15% of the company, had lost approximately $90 million in value in the span of an hour. And that was just the beginning. The stock price was the visible wound. The real damage was happening in rooms I couldn't see. Board meetings being called, lawyers being hired, federal investigators requesting interviews, clients reconsidering contracts, partners distancing themselves from the scandal. An empire doesn't fall all at once. It falls in stages, each collapse triggering the next. Like dominoes made of money and reputation and carefully constructed lies. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. You watching this? It's a bloodbath. How are you feeling? I typed back. Empty. His response came immediately. That's normal. Revenge doesn't feel as good as people think it will. Want to meet for lunch? Talk about it? Not yet. Need to sit with this for a while. Okay. But James, you can't hide in that apartment forever. Eventually, you're going to have to face this. Face them. Face what comes next. He was right. Of course, Marcus was usually right about these things, but eventually felt far away enough to be manageable. Today was watching the consequences unfold. Tomorrow could be about facing them. I stood up, stretched, felt my spine crack in 3 places. The coffee had gone cold. The sun was higher now, streaming through the windows with the kind of brightness that makes everything look overexposed and slightly unreal. Somewhere in Greenwich, Claire was probably crying. Madison was probably raging. Patricia was probably trying to hold everything together with her particular brand of performative grace. And Richard. Richard was probably in his study surrounded by lawyers and accountants, finally understanding that the walls he'd built around himself weren't nearly as strong as he'd believed. Did I feel guilty? I examined the question honestly, turning it over in my mind like a stone. Guilt requires believing you've done something wrong. I'd exposed the truth. I'd brought consequences to behavior that deserved consequences. I'd done it quietly, legally, with none of the violence or cruelty that had been shown to me. So no, I didn't feel guilty, but I didn't feel triumphant either. I felt like someone standing in the ruins of something they'd helped destroy, knowing it needed to be destroyed, but mourning it anyway. Because even necessary endings are still endings. Even justified revenge still leaves you alone with the aftermath. My phone rang again. Claire again. I stared at her name on the screen, her smiling photo from a vacation we'd taken to Barcelona 2 years ago, back when I still believed we were building a future together. This time, I answered, "Jim." She was crying, words barely intelligible through the sobs. "Jim, where are you? Please, please come home. Everything is falling apart. The lawyers are here. The FBI is here. They're searching Dad's office. They're taking his computers. Mom is having a panic attack. I need you. Please." "I'm not coming back." "Claire, what? You have to come back. You're my husband. We need to face this together." "Face what together?" "Your father's crimes. Your family's corruption. The fact that everything you've ever known was built on fraud? That's not fair. He made mistakes." "Okay, he made mistakes, but he's still my father. He's still family. And you're supposed to be family too." "I was never family," I said quietly. "I was a guest who overstayed his welcome. There's a difference." "That's not true." "Yes, it is. It's been true since the day I met your parents. Since the first time your father looked at me like something he'd scraped off his shoe. Since the first time Madison made a joke about my income and you laughed along. Since every single time you chose silence over standing up for your husband." Silence on the other end. Then, in a smaller voice, "What do you want me to say?" "Nothing. There's nothing to say anymore. I just wanted you to know that I'm filing for divorce. The papers will be delivered to you by the end of the week." "Divorce? You can't. We can work through this." "There's nothing to work through, Claire. We're done. We've been done for a long time. I just finally stopped pretending otherwise." I hung up before she could respond, turned off the phone again, sat back in my chair, and stared at the city, and felt for the first time since last night something approaching peace. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't satisfaction, but it was the absence of the constant low-grade humiliation that had become so normal I'd stopped noticing it. Freedom, I realized, sometimes feels like nothing at all. Like the moment after chronic pain finally stops and you're left with just silence. I sat in that silence for a long time. And then I started planning my next move. By noon, Richard Whitmore's face was on every financial news channel. I watched it happen from my apartment, switching between CNBC, Bloomberg, Fox Business, each one running the same story with slightly different angles, like variations on a theme. There he was, emerging from his estate in Greenwich, surrounded by lawyers in expensive suits that couldn't quite hide the desperation in their body language. Reporters shouting questions, camera flashes creating a strobe effect that made the whole scene look like something from a crime drama. "Mr. Whitmore, did you engage in insider trading?" "Mr. Whitmore, what do you say to allegations of tax fraud? Is it true the SEC has frozen your assets?" He didn't answer, just walked to his car, a black Mercedes because, of course it was, with his head up and his jaw set in that particular expression of wealthy indignation that rich men wear when they're finally being held accountable. Like the investigation itself was the real crime. Like consequences were something that happened to other people. I turned up the volume on the CNBC feed. The anchor, a blonde woman with the kind of gravitas that comes from covering financial disasters for 2 decades, was doing a deep dive into the allegations. Documents suggest a pattern of insider trading spanning at least 15 years, with Whitmore allegedly using his positions on multiple corporate boards to make strategic stock trades ahead of major announcements. Sources close to the investigation say the SEC has evidence of at least 47 separate instances of potential securities fraud, with estimated illegal profits in excess of $12 million. $12 million. That was conservative. My investigation had found closer to 18, but I suppose the SEC was being careful, building their case with only the most ironclad evidence. And if that wasn't enough, the anchor continued. We're now learning about a complex network of offshore accounts and shell corporations allegedly used to hide income from the IRS. Tax experts we've spoken with estimate Whitmore may owe upwards of $40 million in back taxes and penalties. The screen split to show a former federal prosecutor brought on to provide expert commentary. He looked like everyone who'd ever prosecuted white-collar crime, rumpled suit, tired eyes, the weary cynicism of someone who'd seen this story play out too many times. What we're seeing here, he said, is a textbook case of someone who believed the rules didn't apply to them. The arrogance is almost breathtaking. These weren't sophisticated schemes. They were brazen, traceable, the kind of thing that only works as long as nobody looks too closely. And why hasn't anyone looked closely until now? The prosecutor smiled grimly. Rich men protect other rich men. It's how the system works. Until it doesn't. Until someone decides to look, or until someone with the right information decides to share it. I muted the TV and sat back, letting that last sentence hang in the air. Someone with the right information decides to share it. That was me. I was the someone, the anonymous tipster, the catalyst for this entire cascade of consequences, and I still wasn't sure if that made me a hero or a villain. Marcus showed up at my door at 1:15 p.m. carrying 2 bags of Chinese takeout and wearing the expression of someone who'd come to either celebrate or stage an intervention and wasn't quite sure which. You look like, he said by way of greeting. I haven't slept, I gathered. He pushed past me into the apartment, setting the food on the kitchen counter with the familiarity of someone who'd been here 100 times before. When's the last time you ate? I had to think about it. Yesterday morning, I think before the dinner. Jesus, James. He started unpacking containers. Kung Pao chicken, Lane, dumplings, enough food for 4 people. You can't destroy a man's empire on an empty stomach. That's just poor planning. Despite everything, I laughed. It came out rusty, like a door hinge that hadn't been oiled in years, but it was genuine. Marcus had that effect. The ability to find dark humor in darkness itself. We ate in silence for a while, standing at the counter because sitting felt too formal, too much like acknowledging this was a serious conversation rather than just 2 friends having lunch. The Kung Pao was too spicy and the Lane was too greasy, and it was exactly what I needed. So Marcus said, finally wiping his mouth with a paper napkin, You want to tell me how you're actually doing? And I mean actually, not the stoic warrior you were texting me this morning. I don't know how I'm doing. That's honest, at least. I set down my chopsticks, suddenly not hungry anymore. I keep waiting to feel something. Satisfaction, guilt, regret, triumph, something. But there's just nothing. Emptiness. Like I spent 4 months building up to this moment, and now that it's here, I don't know what to do with it. Marcus nodded slowly. That's normal. Revenge is like that. It's all anticipation and planning, and then it happens. And you're just left standing there wondering why it doesn't feel the way you thought it would. You sound like you're speaking from experience. College girlfriend cheated on me with my roommate. I spent 3 months plotting this elaborate scheme to humiliate them both at a party. When I finally did it, when everyone was laughing and they were mortified and I'd won, I just felt tired and mean, like I'd become someone I didn't want to be just to hurt people who'd hurt me. What happened? I apologized, not for being angry, but for how I handled it. Turned out being the bigger person felt better than being the victor. He paused, meeting my eyes. But this isn't the same situation, is it? This isn't a cheating girlfriend. This is systematic fraud and abuse. It's also my wife's father, my wife's family, people who are going to be destroyed by this. People who threw wine in your face and called you a filthy pig. I know. I know they deserved it. I know Richard committed actual crimes and needs to face actual consequences. I know all of that intellectually. But emotionally, I ran my hands through my hair, felt the exhaustion in my bones. Emotionally, I can't stop thinking about Claire crying on the phone, about her mother probably having a genuine panic attack, about how their whole world is imploding. And whose fault is that? Mine? No. Marcus's voice was sharp, cutting through my spiral. Richard's fault. He committed the crimes. He built his empire on fraud. He treated people like because he thought his money made him untouchable. You didn't do this to him. You just made sure he couldn't keep getting away with it. I wanted to believe that. God, I wanted to believe that. But there was a difference between exposing wrongdoing and annihilating someone's entire existence. And I wasn't sure which side of that line I was standing on. I could have done it differently, I said quietly. Could have confronted him privately, given him a chance to make it right, gone to the authorities without going to the press. I had options and he would have buried it. You know, he would have. Men like Richard Whitmore don't suddenly develop consciences when you give them second chances. They hire better lawyers and dig their tunnels deeper and come back twice as vicious. Maybe. Not maybe. Definitely. Marcus grabbed 2 beers from my fridge, opened them both, handed me one. Look, I know this feels messy and complicated and morally ambiguous. That's because it is. Real life doesn't come with clear heroes and villains. But you can't let guilt over collateral damage blind you to the core truth. Richard Whitmore was a criminal who used his privilege to avoid consequences. You just took away his shield. What happens now is justice, not revenge. I took a long drink of the beer, let the cold bitterness ground me in the moment. When did you become so wise? I've always been wise. You just don't usually listen. We moved to the living room, sprawling on furniture that cost more than most cars, but felt right now like the most comfortable thing in the world. Outside, the city continued its afternoon rhythm, oblivious to the small drama playing out in this apartment. Claire called me, I said after a while. What did she say? That she needs me? That I should come home? That we should face this together? Are you going to? I told her I'm filing for divorce. Marcus whistled low. Nuclear option. It's been over for a long time. I just couldn't admit it. Couldn't admit that I'd wasted 3 years on someone who was never really on my side. That's not wasted time. That's learning. Painful, expensive learning, but learning nonetheless. Expensive is right. The divorce is going to be complicated. Because of your actual net worth? Yeah. She married James Hathaway, struggling tech worker. She's about to discover she's actually married to James Hawthorne, near billionaire. That's going to be a shock. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees, giving me his full attention. You know, you're going to have to tell her the truth eventually. The whole truth about who you are, what you're worth, why you hid it. I know. And it's going to hurt her probably more than the Richard stuff in some ways, because the Richard stuff is about her father's crimes. But your secret, that's about your lack of trust in her. That's going to feel personal. It was personal. It is personal. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the patterns in the recessed lighting. I lied to her from the beginning. Not outright lies, but lies by omission. I let her believe I was someone I'm not. I let her whole family think I was beneath them when I could have bought them out 10 times over. Why did you do it? It was the question I'd been avoiding for 3 years. The question that lived at the heart of everything. My fake identity, my fake life, this whole elaborate performance. Because I was tired, I said finally. Tired of being valued only for my money. Tired of never knowing if people liked me or liked my bank account. Tired of first dates that felt like job interviews and relationships that felt like mergers. I wanted to be loved for me, just me, without the complications. And how did that work out? I laughed, but it had no humor in it. She loved me for a version of me that doesn't exist, and her family hated me for the same version. So I guess the answer is terribly. It worked out terribly. You're going to do it differently next time. I don't think there's going to be a next time. I think I'm done with relationships for a while. Maybe a long while. Marcus nodded, not arguing, just accepting. That was one of the things I valued most about him. He didn't try to fix everything. Sometimes he just sat with you in the mess and let you feel what you needed to feel. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking our beers and watching the afternoon light shift across the hardwood floors. Outside, I could hear sirens in the distance, the constant hum of the city, life continuing its relentless forward motion regardless of individual dramas. What happens now? Marcus asked eventually. Legally, the SEC investigation will take months, maybe years. Richard will fight it with everything he has, but the evidence is solid. He'll probably end up with prison time, though, with his lawyers. He might negotiate it down to house arrest or a minimum security facility. And personally, I don't know. File for divorce. Move on. Try to figure out who I actually am when I'm not performing for anyone. You could come out, Marcus suggested carefully. Publicly, as yourself, James Hawthorne, tech billionaire. Stop hiding. Maybe eventually. Right now, I just need time to process all of this. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced at it. Another call from Claire, the 7th one since this morning. You should probably talk to her, Marcus said. Not today maybe, but soon. She deserves to know the truth. All of it. I will, just not yet. When? When I can do it without either apologizing for who I am or gloating about what I've done. When I can just be honest about the whole mess and let her react however she needs to react. Marcus stood up, stretched, started gathering the empty food containers. You know what I think? I'm sure you're about to tell me. I think you're more angry at yourself than you are at them, Richard and Madison and Patricia. They were just being who they've always been. Rich, entitled, who think the world exists to serve them. But you betrayed yourself. You made yourself small because you thought being loved required diminishment. And that's the real betrayal you're dealing with. The words hit harder than I expected. I sat with them, turning them over, testing them for truth. He was right, of course. The anger I felt toward Richard was clean, justified, uncomplicated. He'd been cruel, and I'd responded with consequences. Cause and effect, simple. But the anger I felt toward myself was murkier, darker, shot through with shame and regret and the nauseating realization that I'd been complicit in my own humiliation for 3 years. So what do I do about that? I asked. Forgive yourself, learn from it, and never make yourself small for anyone ever again. That's it. That's your wisdom. That's it. The rest is just details. He left around 3 p.m. after making me promise to sleep, eat actual meals, and call my lawyer about the divorce proceedings. I promised all 3 things with varying degrees of sincerity. After he was gone, I stood at the window again, I'd spent half my life at this window in the past 24 hours, it seemed, and watched the city do its thing. People rushing, cars honking, the endless commerce and conflict and connection that made up urban existence. Somewhere out there, Richard was probably meeting with his crisis management team, trying to spin this disaster into something survivable. Madison was probably calling in favors, mobilizing her social network to wage a PR battle. Patricia was probably sedated, unable to cope with the sudden reversal of fortune. And Claire. Claire was probably in our condo, her family's condo, trying to understand how her life had fallen apart in the span of a single evening. I felt a pang of something that might have been sympathy or might have been guilt. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. My phone buzzed again, not a call this time, but a text from a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Huey, this is Sarah Chen from Redstone Analytics. Just wanted to confirm receipt of final payment for our services. Also, and I hope this isn't inappropriate, but well done. Been in this business 20 years, and I've never seen such a clean execution of such a comprehensive takedown. Whatever he did to you, he deserved what he'd got. I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, "Thank you for your work. It was thorough and professional, and yes, he deserved it. I just wish I felt better about it." Her response came quickly. Justice rarely feels as satisfying as we think it will, but it's still justice. Take care of yourself. I set the phone down and walked to my bedroom, the bedroom Claire had never seen. In the apartment she didn't know I owned, in the life I'd kept hidden like a shameful secret. The bed was made with hospital corners, courtesy of the cleaning service. The curtains were drawn. The room was cool and dark and quiet, a sensory deprivation chamber designed for sleep. I lay down fully clothed and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow, I'll figure out what comes next. Tomorrow, I'll start dealing with the divorce and the fallout and the inevitable moment when Claire learns the truth about who I really am. Tomorrow, I'll start rebuilding a life that doesn't require pretending. But today I just needed to rest. The last thing I thought before sleep finally took me was a line from a poem I'd read in college. Something about how revenge is a dish best served cold, but rarely tastes as good as promised. I dreamed of wine and broken glass and a table where I finally had a seat, but no longer wanted to sit. And when I woke, 6 hours later, the sun was setting and my phone was full of messages, and the world had kept turning despite my absence. It was time to face what I'd done. I woke to 17 missed calls and the amber light of sunset bleeding through the curtains. For a moment, one blissful, disoriented moment. I didn't remember the wine or the phone call or the empire I'd toppled with a few well-placed truths. I was just a man waking up in a bed, muscles stiff from sleeping in clothes, mouth dry with the particular thirst that comes from emotional exhaustion. Then memory crashed back like a wave, and I remembered everything. I checked my phone, 7:43 p.m. I'd slept for nearly 6 hours, a deep, dreamless sleep that felt less like rest and more like my body simply shutting down to process trauma. The missed calls were a mix of Claire, unknown numbers that were probably reporters who'd somehow gotten my cell, and one from my lawyer, David Morrison, marked urgent. I called David back first. "Jesus Christ, James," he answered on the first ring, his voice carrying that particular blend of excitement and panic that lawyers get when their clients do something spectacularly complicated. "Where the hell have you been? I've been trying to reach you all day. Sleeping? What's happened?" What's happened? What hasn't happened? The Whitmore story is everywhere. Every news outlet, every financial... I don't have the full details, but they're starting to ask questions about Claire's husband, about who you are, about whether you might have had access to information. I didn't use any insider information. I know that. You know that. But optics matter, James. Perception matters. Right now, you're the son-in-law who works at a small tech company. But if someone digs deeper, if someone finds out who you really are and what you're really worth, this whole thing starts to look less like organic justice and more like a calculated hit job. I stood up, paced to the window, watched the city lights beginning to dominate the skyline as daylight faded. How much time do I have until... what? Until they figure it out? Until someone connects James Hathaway to James Hawthorne? Until my real identity becomes public knowledge? David was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the sound of papers shuffling, the click of a keyboard. Hard to say. A day, maybe two. Once the financial press gets interested, once someone decides to do a deep dive into everyone connected to the Whitmore family, your dual identity won't hold up. It was always more of a convenient fiction than a real cover. I know. So what do you want to do? We can get ahead of this, make a statement, control the narrative, or we can wait it out, see what happens, respond reactively. Your call. I thought about it, about the satisfaction of finally stepping into the light, about the complications it would create, about Claire learning the truth from a news article rather than from me. Set up a meeting with Claire, I said finally. Tomorrow morning, if possible, somewhere neutral, somewhere we can talk privately. You're going to tell her. She deserves to hear it from me before the world does. That's actually mature of you. I'm impressed. Don't be. I'm not doing it to be noble. I'm doing it because I'm tired of hiding, tired of being two people, tired of this whole charade. Fair enough. What about the divorce papers? Have them ready. I'll sign them after we talk. She's going to fight you on this, especially once she knows what you're really worth. This could get very ugly very fast. I know. Draft a generous settlement, significantly more than she'd be entitled to under normal circumstances. I don't want her to be able to claim I blindsided her and then screwed her over financially. How generous are we talking? I did the math in my head. 20 million plus the condo, which is titled in her name anyway, plus she keeps anything I've given her during the marriage. David whistled low. That's more than generous. That's practically charitable. I lied to her for 3 years, David. The least I can do is make sure she's taken care of. The least you could do is what you're legally required to do, which is significantly less than 20 million. Just draft it. Your money. I'll have everything ready by morning. Meeting at 10 a.m. work for you? Make it 9. I want this done early. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the darkening window. The wine stains were gone, but I could still feel them. Phantom sensations of humiliation dried into my skin. Tomorrow I would tell Claire the truth, all of it. Who I was, what I'd done, why I'd done it. And then I would be free. The night stretched out before me, empty and infinite. I showered, finally washing away the last physical traces of last night's disaster, changed into clean clothes, jeans and a sweater, casual clothes that felt like armor against the formality of everything that was coming. Ordered food from a Thai place that knew me well enough to not ask questions when I requested delivery to the back entrance. I ate pad thai straight from the container while reading the news coverage on my laptop. The Whitmore story had evolved throughout the day, growing tentacles and complications with each new article. Bloomberg Whitmore Industries board calls emergency meeting. CEO's future uncertain. Reuters. Federal prosecutors confirm criminal investigation into Richard Whitmore. New York Times. The fall of a dynasty. How one family's fraud unraveled. That last one was a long-form piece, clearly written by someone who'd been working on it for months and just needed the scandal to break to justify publication. It detailed the Whitmore family history going back 3 generations. The grandfather who'd made his initial fortune in post-war manufacturing, the father who'd expanded into real estate and finance, and Richard, the scion who'd taken a respectable empire and turned it into something that required fraud to maintain. There were interviews with former employees, descriptions of a corporate culture built on fear and entitlement, anecdotes about Richard's temper and Madison's cruelty. It was a thorough dismantling of a family's reputation, and every word of it was factual. I should have felt vindicated. This was exactly what I'd wanted. The truth exposed, the corruption revealed. The Whitmore facing consequences for decades of believing themselves above the law. Instead, I just felt tired. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Mr. Hathaway, this is Elizabeth Chen with the Wall Street Journal. I'm working on a story about the Whitmore family, and I understand you're married to Richard Whitmore's daughter. I'd love to speak with you for the piece. Any chance we could set up a time to talk? I deleted it without responding. 2 minutes later, another text, different number. James, this is Michael Torres from CNBC. We'd like to interview you about your father-in-law's situation. As family, your perspective would be valuable. Please call me at your earliest convenience. Delete another.
Hi, this is Sarah Kim from BuzzFeed News. We're doing a piece on the human side of the Whitmore scandal. Would you be willing to share your experience as part of the family during this difficult time? Delete. They were circling now, the media, drawn by the scent of blood in the water, and I was a loose thread. They all wanted to pull, not realizing yet that pulling on me would unravel an entirely different story.
I turned off my phone completely, poured myself 3 fingers of scotch, Macallan, 25. The kind of scotch Richard probably had in his study and would never drink again after tonight. The irony wasn't lost on me. The scotch burned going down, a good burn, grounding and real. I thought about calling Marcus, but he'd already done his emotional labor for the day. I thought about calling my parents, still alive, still living in Vermont where I'd grown up, still blissfully unaware of most of my adult life. But explaining this would require explaining everything, and I wasn't ready for that conversation. So I sat alone in my expensive apartment with my expensive scotch and my expensive furniture, and I felt profoundly, absolutely alone. This was the cost of being 2 people. I realized when you split yourself in half, when you show different versions to different audiences, you end up with no one who knows the whole truth. No one who can see all of you and love you anyway. Marcus came closest, but even niece Marcus didn't know everything. Didn't know how much I'd loved Claire despite everything. Didn't know how many nights I'd lain awake wondering if I should just tell her the truth and risk everything. Didn't know about the times I'd almost walked away, almost ended it, almost chosen authenticity over acceptance. I pulled out my laptop again and opened a document I'd been avoiding for months. The file, containing every piece of evidence against Richard, every transaction, every crime, every proof of corruption. I'd looked at it before, obviously. Had reviewed it exhaustively when making the decision to go forward, but I hadn't looked at it since making the phone call. Now I scrolled through it slowly, really reading it, letting the weight of what I'd done sink in. Page after page of bank records, stock trades, email correspondence, witness statements, a pattern of behavior so clear and consistent that there was no possible innocent explanation. Richard Whitmore was guilty. Not technically guilty, not maybe guilty. Undeniably, irrefutably guilty. And if I hadn't exposed him, he would have continued being guilty, would have kept stealing, would have kept using his privilege and power to bend rules and break laws and face no consequences. You did the right thing, I said out loud to the empty apartment, testing the words, seeing if they felt true. They did. Mostly with caveats and complications, but they did. The right thing had still destroyed a family. It still hurt people who weren't guilty of anything except proximity to guilt. Had still made me the architect of other people's suffering, even if that suffering was just the natural consequence of their own actions finally catching up to them. Morality, I was learning, was messier than philosophy makes it seem. At 11 p.m., my phone, still off, sat on the coffee table like an accusation. I turned it back on, bracing for the flood of messages that would inevitably come. 73 notifications, calls, texts, emails, all demanding my attention, my explanation, my participation in the drama I'd created. Most of them I ignored. But there was one voicemail I couldn't avoid. From Patricia Whitmore, Claw's mother, time-stamped 6:47 p.m. James? Her voice was different than I'd ever heard it, stripped of its careful cultivation, raw and desperate. James, I don't know if you're listening to these. I don't know if you care, but please, please call us back. Call Claire back. She's not doing well. She's barely eating. She won't stop crying. She needs you. Whatever happened at dinner, whatever Richard did, we can fix it. We can apologize. We can make it right. Just please don't abandon her. Not now. Not when everything is falling apart. Please. I listened to it 3 times, hearing the genuine pain in Patricia's voice, the motherly desperation that transcended all the usual social performance. And still, I didn't call back, because calling back meant explaining, meant revealing, meant facing them before I was ready. Tomorrow. I would face all of it tomorrow. Instead, I opened my laptop and started writing. Not an explanation or a justification, but something more fundamental. My story. The real story from the beginning. My name is James Alexander Hawthorne. I am 30 years old. I am worth approximately 800 me. And for the past 3 years, I have been pretending to be someone else. The words came easier than I expected, flowing out like water from a dam finally broken. I wrote about MIT and my first company, about the isolation of a sudden wealth at 23, about wanting to be normal, to be loved for myself, to find connection without calculation. I wrote about meeting Claire, about the decision to hide my wealth, about every small choice that led to the larger deception. I wrote about the dinners at the Whitmore estate, the casual cruelty, the death by 1,000 cuts, the way humiliation becomes normalized when it's consistent enough. I wrote about the wine, about Madison's laugh, about Claire's silence, and I wrote about the phone call, about revenge that felt like justice and justice that felt like revenge and the impossible tangled mess of both. I wrote for 2 hours straight, barely stopping, the story pouring out of me like confession or testimony or maybe just the simple human need to be witnessed, to have someone, even if that someone was just a document on a laptop screen, know the whole truth. When I finally stopped, when my hands cramped and my eyes burned, and the story had been told as much as it could be told, it was after 1 a.m. I saved the document, titled it simply, The Truth. Then I sent it to David Morrison with a note. In case I lose my nerve tomorrow, in case I can't say everything I need to say, make sure Claire gets this. His response came surprisingly quickly for the hour. I'll make sure. For what it's worth, James, I think you're being incredibly brave. Most people in your position would lawyer up, shut down, protect themselves at all costs. You're choosing honesty. That's rare. I don't feel brave. I feel exhausted. Same thing sometimes. I closed the laptop, stood up, walked to the window one more time because apparently that's what I did now in moments of crisis. Stood at windows and stared at cities and pretended the lights below held answers. The city was quieter now, the nighttime rhythm settling in. Fewer cars, fewer people, just the steady pulse of urban existence continuing regardless of individual dramas. Somewhere out there, Claire was probably awake too. Probably crying if Patricia's voicemail was accurate. Probably wondering where I was and why I disappeared and whether our marriage had ever been real. Tomorrow she would get answers. Tomorrow she would learn that her husband was a near billionaire who'd been pretending to be poor, that her father's downfall wasn't random justice, but calculated revenge. That the man she'd married was someone else entirely. Tomorrow everything would be out in the open, but tonight, Tonight I stood at my window in my expensive apartment and felt the weight of 3 years of lies settling into my bones like cold. I poured another scotch. The bottle was nearly empty now. Richard's Scotch drunk in Richard's honor, celebrating Richard's fall. Except it didn't feel like celebrating. It felt like mourning. Not for Richard and his arrogance and his crimes, but for the version of myself I'd killed when I made that phone call. The quiet, accommodating James who kept his head down and his real self hidden. The man who'd chosen smallness over truth because being loved falsely seemed safer than being known truly. That James was gone now. Had to be gone because you can't come back from this. Can't unring this bell. Can't pretend to be poor and powerless once the world knows you're rich and dangerous. I raised my glass to my reflection in the window. Here's to the truth, I said to myself. To the city. To nobody. However much it costs. I drank. The scotch burned, and somewhere in the Connecticut night, a family that had once seemed untouchable was learning what it felt like when someone touched back. I went to bed around 2 a.m., setting 3 alarms because I couldn't afford to oversleep. Tomorrow was going to be the hardest conversation of my life. I needed to be sharp, focused, ready. As I lay in the darkness, waiting for sleep that didn't want to come, I thought about what I would say to Claire, how I would explain the inexplicable, how I would apologize for deception while also defending the reasons for it. There were no good words for this. No script that would make it okay. No explanation that would erase 3 years of fundamental dishonesty. All I could do was tell the truth and let her decide what it meant. The last thought I had before finally falling asleep was simple and devastating. This was going to break her heart all over again. And unlike her father's downfall, this one really would be my fault. The restaurant was called Clement, a quiet bistro in Midtown that served overpriced Eggs Benedict to people who needed neutral territory for difficult conversations, divorces, business breakups, the kind of meetings where public space provides a buffer against the worst impulses of human emotion. I arrived 15 minutes early, took a table in the back corner where we'd have privacy but not isolation, ordered coffee. I didn't drink and watched the door like a man waiting for his own execution. Claire walked in at 9:02 a.m. I barely recognized her. The woman who appeared in the doorway looked like someone had taken my wife and drained her of color and light and replaced her with a black and white photograph. She wore no makeup, unusual for Claire, who rarely left the house without at least mascara and lipstick. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater, the kind of outfit that said she had given up on appearances entirely. But it was her eyes that hit me hardest. Red-rimmed, hollow, the eyes of someone who'd spent 2 days crying and still had tears left over. She saw me and stopped, just stood there in the doorway, frozen. And for a moment I thought she might turn around and leave, that this might be too much, too soon. Too hard. Then she squared her shoulders, a gesture so familiar it hurt, and walked toward the table. I stood up, old habits, old manners, old pretenses of being a gentleman. "Don't," she said, her voice rough. "Don't stand. Don't pull out my chair. Don't pretend this is a normal breakfast between a normal married couple." I sat back down. She slid into the chair across from me, not taking off her coat like she might need to leave quickly. The silence that followed was enormous, heavy with 3 years of accumulated lies and 2 days of accumulated devastation. "You look terrible," I said finally, because someone had to say something. "My father is probably going to prison. My family's name is being destroyed on national television. My husband disappeared without a word and won't return my calls. Yeah, I look terrible. Thanks for noticing." The bitterness in her voice was new. Claire had always been soft-spoken, gentle, conflict-averse to the point of dysfunction. This Claire, sharp-edged and angry, was someone I'd never met before. I'm sorry, I said. For which part? For leaving? For the cryptic phone call? For whatever you did that made everything explode? Her voice rose slightly, then caught. Or are you apologizing for my father throwing wine in your face while I sat there like a coward and did nothing? That last part came out broken, jagged with self-formation. And despite everything, despite my anger and my exhaustion and my determination to end this marriage, I felt something soften inside me. That's not why we're here, I said gently. Then why are we here, Jim? Or should I call you James now? Your lawyer was very specific about that when he called. Mr. Hawthorne would like to meet. Not Haway, Hawthorne. Like even my name for you was wrong. There it was, the opening, the door I'd come here to walk through. I took a breath, steadied myself. This was it. My name is James Alexander Hawthorne, I began. I'm 30 years old. I was born in Burlington, Vermont. I went to MIT. I graduated when I was 20 with degrees in computer science and applied mathematics. I paused. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Confusion mixed with dread, like watching someone build a bomb and not knowing when it would detonate. When I was 23, I continued, I sold my first company for $47 million. When I was 25, I sold my second company for $230 million. When I was 27, I started Silverline Ventures, which I still own and operate. Current estimated value is around $2 billion. My personal net worth is approximately $800 million. The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a gun. Claire's face went through a series of expressions. Confusion to disbelief to understanding to something that looked like physical pain. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. What? The word came out as barely more than a whisper. I'm not a struggling tech worker, Claire. I never was. I'm a venture capitalist. I own a portfolio of companies. I have assets in 14 countries. The apartment we lived in together? I own the building. The car you thought your father gave me. I bought it. That watch you gave me for Christmas that you saved up for? I could have bought the entire store. She was shaking her head slowly at first, then faster. No, that's impossible. I would have known. Someone would have told me. Google exists, Jim, James, whoever then you are. I'm not hard to find if you know where to look, but you have to know to look for Hawthorne, not Hathaway. I changed my name slightly when I married you, just enough to create separation between my public identity and my private life. You lied about your name. I changed it legally, filed the paperwork, made it official. James Hathaway is my legal name now, but everything else, the career, the companies, the money, that's all still under Hawthorne. And you never thought to dig deeper because why would you? You thought you knew who you'd married. Claire stood up suddenly, knocking her chair back. Several other diners glanced over. She didn't seem to notice or care. I need to. I can't. She pressed her hands to her temples like her head might explode. This isn't real. This is some kind of breakdown or psychotic episode or it's real. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, turned the screen toward her. Look. She looked. Her face went white. The account balance showed 47 during 83,492.13. And that was just one account. One checking account out of dozens I maintained. Oh my God, she breathed. Oh my God. She sat back down, not gracefully, more like her legs gave out, stared at me like I was a stranger, which, in a way, I was. Why? The question came out raw, desperate. Why would you do this? Why would you pretend to be someone else? Why would you let my family treat you like you were nothing when you could have bought and sold us 10 times over? This was the question I'd been preparing for. the one that mattered more than all the others. Because I wanted to be loved for myself, I said simply. Not for my money, not for what I could provide or buy or offer. Just for me, for who I am as a person. But you weren't yourself. Her voice cracked. You were playing a role. You were pretending to be someone smaller, weaker, less than you actually are. How is that being yourself? I know it doesn't make sense. I know it was up and wrong and ultimately just another kind of lie, but at the time it felt like the only way to have something real, to know that someone chose me, not my bank account. Claire laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that's too close to crying. Real? You want to talk about real? I married you thinking I knew you, thinking we were partners, equals, building a life together. I defended you to my family. Not well enough, I know that now, but I tried. I told them you were a good man, that money didn't matter, that love was more important than status. And the whole time she trailed off, tears finally spilling over. The whole time you were lying to me. You were rich, you were powerful, you were everything my family values. And you hid it so you could, what? Feel superior to us? Watch us treat you badly and know you could destroy us whenever you wanted? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? She leaned forward, eyes blazing through the tears. Explain it to me, James. Make it make sense, because right now it looks like an elaborate game where I was the punchline. I met her eyes, held them, let her see the truth in mine. I fell in love with you. That part was real. Everything else was complicated and messy and maybe unforgivable, but my feelings for you were genuine. Were. She caught the past tense. Past tense. Claire, just answer the question. Do you still love me? The question hung between us, heavy and inevitable. I could lie, could say yes and try to salvage something from this wreckage, could choose the path of least resistance one more time. But I was done lying. I don't know, I said quietly. I love the person I thought you were, the person who seemed kind and genuine and different from her family. But that person never stood up for me, never fought for me, never chose me when it mattered. So I don't know who I actually fell in love with, or if she even exists. Claire flinched like I'd hit her. That's not fair. None of this is fair. But it is honest, which is more than I've been for 3 years. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the table, tears tracking down her face silently. When she spoke again, her voice was small, broken. Was any of it real? Our wedding, our life together, the things we talked about, the plans we made? Was I married to a real person or a performance? Both, I said, because it was the only true answer. I was myself in a lot of ways. My personality, my values, my feelings, those were real. I just hid the circumstances. The context? The context? She repeated hollowly. You mean the fact that you're richer than my father? That you could have been his equal, his peer, someone he respected, instead of... She stopped, seemed to realize where that sentence was going. Instead of someone he could throw wine at? I finished for her. Yes, that context. My father, she said suddenly, sitting up straighter. Oh my God, my father. The investigation, the arrests, all of it, that was you. You did this. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I exposed his crimes. He committed them. There's a difference. How long have you been planning this? How long have you been investigating my family? 4 months. 4 months. She was shaking her head again. That same disbelieving motion. You've been secretly investigating my father for 4 months while sitting at his dinner table, while sleeping in my bed, while pretending to be my husband. I wasn't pretending to be your husband. I was your husband. I am your husband. The investigation was separate. Nothing is separate. Don't you understand that? You're the reason my father's going to prison. You're the reason my mother is having panic attacks. You're the reason my sister is facing criminal conspiracy charges.
Oh, you didn't know about that? Yeah, turns out Madison was involved in some of the fraud too. They arrested her this morning. So, congratulations, James. You didn't just destroy my father. You destroyed my entire family. The information about Madison hit harder than I expected. I'd known she worked at her father's company, knew she was complicit in the culture of corruption, but I hadn't realized she was directly involved in the criminal activity. I didn't know, I said weakly.
Would it have mattered if you did? Would it have?
I examined the question honestly, searching my conscience for limits to my revenge, lines I wouldn't have crossed. No, I admitted. If she committed crimes, she deserves consequences, just like your father. They're my family, Claire said, and the rawness in her voice was like a wound opening. They're terrible in a lot of ways. They're elitist and cruel and everything you think they are, but they're still my family. And you destroyed them methodically, deliberately. You planned it for months and then you executed it. And you didn't think for 1 second about what it would do to me. I thought about it. I said, every day, every time I saw you, every time you chose their comfort over my dignity. So this is punishment for me being a bad wife? No, this is me finally choosing myself over a relationship that was killing me by inches. This is me deciding that being loved falsely wasn't worth being treated like garbage. This is me saying, enough. We sat in silence for a moment, the truth finally fully exposed between us like broken glass on the table. I want her divorce, I said finally, because someone had to say it out loud. I figured. Her voice was flat now, empty of emotion. Your lawyer sent over the papers this morning. Very thorough. Very generous, actually. $20 million. That's what our marriage is worth to you. That's the price of your guilt. It's not guilt. It's me trying to take care of you despite everything. Making sure you're okay even though we're ending. I don't want your money, James. I don't want anything from you. I want the last 3 years back. I want my family back. I want my life back. But I can't have any of those things, can I? No, I said softly. None of us can go back. She stood up again, more controlled this time, started putting on her coat, preparing to leave. For what it's worth, she said, not looking at me. I'm sorry for all the times I didn't stand up for you, for all the times I chose the easy path over the right one, for being too weak to be the wife you deserved. You're right that I failed you. I did. I know I did, Claire. But you failed me too. You lied to me from the beginning. You never gave me the chance to love the real you. You decided I couldn't be trusted with the truth, and you built our entire marriage on that assumption. So maybe we both got what we deserved. A relationship built on false foundations that collapsed the moment someone applied pressure. She walked toward the door, then stopped, turned back. I hope it was worth it, she said. Your revenge, your grand gesture, your moment of finally standing up for yourself. I hope it feels as good as you thought it would. It doesn't, I admitted. Good. At least we're both suffering. That feels fair somehow. And then she was gone, walking out of the restaurant and out of my life, leaving me sitting alone at a table with cold coffee and the wreckage of 3 years of lies between us. I sat there for a long time after she left, watching other people have normal breakfasts, normal conversations, normal lives that didn't involve billions of dollars and destroyed families and marriages ending in overpriced bistro. The waitress came over eventually, professional smile in place. Can I get you anything else? Just the check, I said. She brought it. I left $300 for a breakfast neither of us had eaten because money was meaningless and tipping excessively was easier than thinking about what had just happened. Outside, the day was bright and cold,
January in New York, the kind of weather that makes you feel every emotion more sharply. I walked without direction, just moving, needing the physical activity to process everything. Claire was right about one thing. I'd failed her. Not just in the obvious ways, the lying, the hiding, the deception, but in the fundamental way of never giving her the chance to prove she could love all of me. I decided she was too shallow, too influenced by her family, too caught up in wealth and status to love someone without money. But I'd never tested that assumption, never given her the opportunity to surprise me. Maybe she would have loved me anyway. Maybe she would have stood up to her family with more conviction if she'd known I didn't need their approval or their money. Maybe our relationship could have been different, better, real, in a way it never got to be. Or maybe not. Maybe she would have loved me for my billions the same way she'd pied me for my poverty, with good intentions but insufficient courage. I'd never know now. My phone buzzed, a text from David Morrison. How did it go? I typed back about as well as expected. She knows everything now. She's signing the papers. I'm sorry, James. For what it's worth, you did the right thing. Did I? You told the truth. That's always the right thing, even when it hurts. I pocketed my phone and kept walking through midtown crowds and past street vendors and around tourists taking selfies in front of landmarks they'd forget as soon as they got home. The truth was supposed to set you free. That's what they always said. But nobody mentioned that freedom could feel exactly like falling. I was free now. Free from the Whitmore family, free from a marriage built on lies, free from the weight of pretending to be someone I wasn't. And I had never felt more alone. The story broke at 2:47 p.m. I was back in my apartment, sitting in the same chair where I'd watched the sunrise yesterday when my phone started buzzing with an intensity that suggested the world had finally connected the dots I'd left scattered like breadcrumbs. The headline was from Bloomberg. Whitmore's son-in-law revealed as tech billionaire James Hawthorne the hidden fortune behind the family scandal. I read it with a strange detachment, like reading about someone else's life. They'd done their homework quickly, probably had someone working on it since yesterday, just waiting for confirmation. The article laid it all out. My real name, my companies, my net worth, my marriage to Claire under a false identity. They even had quotes from unnamed sources at Silverline Ventures confirming that yes, I was the same James Hawthorne who'd made headlines 5 years ago for a particularly lucrative acquisition. The article stopped just short of directly accusing me of orchestrating Richard's downfall, but the implication was there in every carefully worded paragraph. The timing was too perfect. The son-in-law with the secret fortune, the father-in-law facing federal charges, the convenient exposure of crimes that happened to benefit the wronged party. They didn't have proof. Couldn't have proof because I'd been careful. But they didn't need proof. They just needed the story to be compelling enough that people would believe it. Anyway, my phone rang. "Marcus, have you seen it?" he asked without preamble. "I'm reading it now. It's everywhere, James. Every outlet picked it up within minutes. Twitter is losing its mind. You're trending. Had secret billionaire is trending. Someone made a meme comparing you to the Count of Monte Cristo. That's actually pretty accurate. This isn't funny. Your face is on CNBC right now. They're doing a whole segment on the billionaire who pretended to be poor. They found your MIT yearbook photo. Your Wikipedia page has been edited 17 times in the last hour." I pulled up my laptop, navigated to my Wikipedia page. Marcus was right. What had been a sparse, mostly business-focused entry yesterday was now a detailed biography complete with sections on personal life and controversy and marriage to Claire Whitmore. Someone had even added a photo. Me at a charity gala 3 years ago, standing next to Claire, both of us smiling like we had a future. The caption read, "Hawthorne with wife Claire Whitmore before his identity became public knowledge." "James, you still there?" Yeah, I said, I'm here. What do you want to do? We can put out a statement, control the narrative, get ahead of the speculation before it becomes accepted fact. What would the statement say? That I didn't orchestrate my father-in-law's arrest? That I just happened to marry into a family of criminals and then those crimes just happened to become public right after they humiliated me? We could tell the truth that you hired investigators, found evidence of actual crimes and reported them to the proper authorities. That you did what any citizen should do when they discover fraud. And the part where I did it because they threw wine in my face. Marcus was quiet for a moment. We could leave that part out. I'm done leaving parts out, Marcus. I spent 3 years leaving parts out. Look where it got me. So what then? You just let them write whatever narrative they want? I thought about it, about controlling the story versus letting the story unfold, about managing perception versus accepting reality. Yeah, I said finally. I think I do. I think I just let it happen. Whatever consequences come, I'll deal with them. But I'm done performing, done managing, done pretending to be anything other than exactly what I am. And what are you? A guy who got tired of being treated like and did something about it. If that makes me a villain in some people's eyes, I can live with that. Marcus sighed, the sound of someone who knew better than to argue when my mind was made up. All right. But James, this is going to get worse before it gets better. The attention, the scrutiny, the judgment. People are going to have opinions about you and your choices, and they're going to share those opinions loudly and publicly. I know. And Claire, this is going to be hard on her too. Having her marriage dissected in public, having her family's crimes connected to your revelation, having everyone speculate about what she knew and when she knew it. That thought hit harder than I expected. Claire crying in yoga pants in a restaurant was one thing. Claire being gounded by paparazzi, her name dragged through digital mud, her privacy violated by strangers with opinions. That was something else entirely. I said quietly, yeah, so maybe consider that statement after all. Not to defend yourself, but to protect her, to make it clear that she had nothing to do with any of this. He was right. Whatever anger I felt toward Claire, whatever disappointment and hurt and sense of betrayal, she didn't deserve to be collateral damage in the media feeding frenzy. She'd already lost her family. She didn't need to lose her dignity, too. Draft something, I told Marcus. Something short, confirming my identity, confirming the divorce, making it clear that Claire was unaware of both my financial situation and my investigation into her father, emphasizing that she's a victim in this, not a conspirator. I'll have it ready in an hour. He hung up. I sat with my laptop reading article after article, watching my life become public property in real time. The reactions were mixed, predictably. Some people saw me as a hero, the wronged husband who'd exposed corruption and brought down a corrupt empire. Others saw me as calculating and cruel, a billionaire who'd manipulated a woman into marriage just to destroy her family. Some thought the whole thing was romantic in a twisted way. Others thought it was sociopathic. Everyone had an opinion, and everyone felt entitled to share it. The first journalist showed up at my building at 4:15 p.m. I watched from my window as a woman with a microphone and a camera crew tried to convince my doorman to let them up. To his credit, Gerald, 63 years old, former Marine, the kind of doorman who took his job seriously, stood his ground with the implacable calm of someone who dealt with worse than reporters. She was followed by 3 more crews over the next hour. Then someone from TMZ. Then a blogger with a podcast. Then what looked like just random people with smartphones, probably hoping to catch a glimpse of the billionaire who'd been hiding in plain sight. My phone continued its assault of notifications, friend requests on social media from people I'd never met, LinkedIn connection requests, emails to addresses that should have been private asking for interviews, comments, my side of the story. One email stood out though, from an address I didn't recognize, but a name I did. Mr. Hawthorne, you don't know me, but I worked at Whitmore Industries for 12 years. I was let go 3 years ago for performance issues, which was really code for you asked too many questions about accounting irregularities. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for doing what I didn't have the courage or resources to do. Richard Whitmore ruined lives. Mine, dozens of others who he fired or sued or destroyed when they threatened his empire. Seeing him finally face consequences feels like justice, not revenge. I don't know your story or your reasons, but whatever they are, you did the right thing. Sincerely, Thomas Brennan. I read it 3 times, feeling something loosen in my chest. This was the part the media couldn't capture. The people who'd been hurt by Richard's corruption, who'd suffered in silence while he used his wealth and power as a shield. I wasn't the only victim. I was just the one with enough resources to fight back. I replied, Mr. Brennan, thank you for sharing your story. I'm sorry for what you went through. You deserved better. If you have documentation of what happened to you, the federal investigators would probably be interested. Justice shouldn't just be for recent crimes. J.H. His response came within minutes. I kept everything. I'll reach out to them today. Thank you again. The statement went out at 6 p.m., posted on both my personal accounts and Silverline Ventures official channels. I can confirm that I am James Alexander Hawthorne, founder and CEO of Silverline Ventures. During my marriage to Claire Whitmore, I used the name James Hathaway for personal reasons related to privacy. My wife was unaware of my financial circumstances. This was my choice and my deception, not hers. She is blameless in both my decision to conceal my identity and in the recent revelations about her father's criminal activities. When I became aware of evidence suggesting financial crimes, I did what I believed was my civic duty. I reported that evidence to the appropriate authorities. The subsequent investigation was conducted by federal agencies without my involvement. I ask that the media respect my soon-to-be ex-wife's privacy during this difficult time. She has done nothing wrong and deserves to process these events without public harassment. I will not be making further statements or granting interviews. Thank you for your understanding. James Hawthorne. It was measured, professional, and said exactly as much as I wanted to say without admitting to anything that could be used against me later. David had reviewed it 3 times, Marcus twice before we all agreed it struck the right balance. The response was immediate and predictable. Some people praised the statement as classy and dignified. Others criticized it as self-serving spin. A few pointed out that reporting crimes to authorities was literally the least I could do and didn't make me a hero. All true, all valid, all completely beside the point. I turned off my phone again. This was becoming a habit, and walked to the window. The camera crews were still there, a small cluster on the sidewalk across the street, probably hoping I'd emerge for a dramatic shot they could use for the evening news. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. Instead, I ordered dinner from a place that knew to use the service entrance. Ate pasta I barely tasted while watching the sunset over the city for what felt like the 100th time in 2 days. Tried to read a book, but couldn't focus on the words. Tried to watch TV, but every channel seemed to be covering either the Whitmore scandal or the secret billionaire revelation. I was trapped. Not physically, I could leave any time, could go anywhere, could fly to another country if I wanted, but trapped nonetheless by the weight of public attention, by the knowledge that every move would be watched and analyzed and judged. This was what I'd wanted, wasn't it? To stop being invisible, to stop being underestimated, to be seen as I actually was. Be careful what you wish for. At 9 p.m., my phone turned back on to check for important messages, rang with a number I didn't recognize, but a Vermont area code I did. My mother. James Alexander Hawthorne, she said when I answered, using my full name the way she only did when I was in serious trouble. Would you like to explain to me why I had to learn about my son's divorce and secret identity from the evening news? I closed my eyes, leaned my head back against the chair. Of course. Of course my parents had seen the coverage. Of course they were calling. Of course this was happening now on top of everything else. Hi, Mom. Don't hi, Mom me. What on earth is going on? Are you okay? Are you safe? Why didn't you tell us you got married? Why didn't you tell us about the divorce? And what's this about you being a billionaire? Your father and I thought you were doing well, but a billionaire? The questions came rapid fire. Maternal concern mixed with hurt and confusion. I could picture her in their Vermont farmhouse, probably in the kitchen where the old wall phone still hung, pacing the length of the cord the way she did when she was agitated. I'm okay, I said. I'm safe, and I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I should have called you before the story broke. There's been a lot happening very quickly. A lot happening. James, the news is saying you married a woman, hid your identity from her, and then destroyed her father's company out of revenge? Please tell me that's not true. Please tell me my son didn't do something so calculated. It's more complicated than that. Then uncomplicate it. Talk to me. Explain what's happening, because right now I don't recognize the person they're describing on television. So I told her not everything, not the full depth of the humiliation or the wine or Madison's laughter or the 4 months of investigation, but enough about meeting Claire, about wanting to be loved for myself, about the Whitmore family's treatment, about discovering the fraud and making the choice to report it. She listened without interrupting, which was unusual for my mother, and when I finished, there was a long silence. You were lonely, she said finally, her voice softer now. That's what this was really about, wasn't it? You were lonely, and you thought hiding your success would somehow make connection possible. The observation, simple and direct, hit like a punch to the chest. Yeah, I admitted. I was lonely. I am lonely. Oh, sweetheart. The endearment unused since I was a child made my throat tight. Money doesn't have to mean isolation. Your father and I didn't raise you to think that success and connection are mutually exclusive. I know. I got in my own head, made it more complicated than it needed to be, and now you're paying for it. Not just you, this Claire woman is paying for it too. Her whole family, criminal or not, is paying for your choices. They were criminals, Mom. Richard Whitmore defrauded investors, evaded taxes, committed actual crimes for years. I didn't make that up. I just made sure it came to light. I understand that. And I'm not saying he doesn't deserve consequences, but there's a difference between justice and revenge, James. And from where I'm sitting, it looks like you chose revenge. Maybe I did. Maybe it was both. Does it matter? It matters because revenge doesn't heal anything. It just creates more wounds. And I'm worried that you've hurt yourself as much as you've hurt them. I thought about that. About the emptiness I'd felt since making that phone call, about the hollowness of victory, about sitting alone in an expensive apartment while my life became entertainment for strangers. You might be right, I said quietly. Of course I'm right. I'm your mother. A pause. Do you want to come home just for a few days? Get away from the city, from the cameras, from all of it? Your father and I would love to see you. The offer was tempting. Vermont in January? Snow and silence and the kind of peace that only comes from being far away from everything. My parents' farmhouse with its creaky floors and wood stove, and the guest room that still had posters from my teenage years on the walls. I can't, I said. Not yet. There are things I need to deal with here first. Legal stuff with the divorce, making sure Claire is protected from the media circus, figuring out what comes next. But you'll come eventually. Yeah, Mom. I'll come eventually. Good. And James, whatever you did, Whatever mistakes you made, you're still my son. I still love you. Nothing changes that. The words, simple and unconditional, nearly broke me. I love you too. I managed. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my apartment and let myself feel it. All the grief and guilt and exhaustion I'd been holding at bay. Let it wash over me like a wave, drowning me in the reality of what I'd done and what it cost. I'd exposed corruption. I'd brought down a criminal. I'd stood up for myself after years of accepting less than I deserved. And I'd destroyed a marriage, hurt a woman who loved me, isolated myself from the only connection I'd had, and become a cautionary tale about the dangers of deception. Both things were true. The justice and the damage. The righteousness and the cruelty. The necessity and the excess. I'd thought revenge would feel like triumph, like vindication, like finally being seen and valued and respected. Instead, it felt like losing. Not because I regretted what I'd done. I didn't. Not really. Richard Whitmore deserved everything coming to him. But because winning this battle meant losing something else, something I couldn't quite name, but could feel the absence of, like a missing tooth. My phone buzzed one more time, a text from an unknown number. This is Madison Whitmore. I just want you to know that I see you. I see what you did. And when I get out of this, and I will get out of this, I'm coming for you. Not with lawyers or money or any of the things you used against us, but with the truth about who you really are. A small, petty man who destroyed a family because his feelings got hurt. You think you won? You didn't win. You just showed everyone what a monster you are. Sleep well, you coward. I read it twice, then deleted it. She could come for me if she wanted, could tell whatever truth she thought she had, could wage whatever war she thought would restore her family's honor. I'd still be standing. Because that's the thing about burning everything down. Once you've done it, once you've reduced your old life to ash and walked away from the flames, there's nothing left to burn. I was free in the way that people who have nothing left to lose are free. And tomorrow, I'd figure out what to do with that freedom. 3 days passed, like years. I didn't leave my apartment, didn't answer the door, didn't respond to the emails and calls and messages that continued flooding in like a digital tsunami that refused to recede. I existed in a strange limbo, physically safe in my tower above the city, but psychologically under siege from an attention I'd never wanted and couldn't escape. The news cycle should have moved on. That's how it usually works. Scandal erupts, burns bright for 48 hours, then gets replaced by the next disaster, the next outrage, the next thing people can be angry about from the safety of their screens. But the Whitmore story had legs. The combination of wealth, fraud, family drama, and my secret identity created a narrative too compelling to die quickly. By day 2, someone had leaked details of the divorce settlement. $20 million made headlines. Secret billionaire offers 20 to wife he deceived. The comment sections exploded with opinions. Some called it generous evidence that I had a conscience. Others called it guilt money, blood money, proof that I knew I'd done something unforgivable. No one seemed to consider that maybe it was just me trying to do right by someone I'd wronged, independent of public opinion or moral calculus. By day 3, Richard's lawyers had filed a motion claiming the investigation was fruit of a poison tree, that I'd obtained information illegally and used it to orchestrate a vendetta. It was a desperate move, legally dubious, but it gave the media a new angle. Whitmore legal team claims billionaire son-in-law orchestrated vendetta. David called to tell me not to worry, that the motion would be dismissed, that my investigation had been legal, and my reporting of crimes to authorities was protected activity. I wasn't worried about the legal aspects. I was worried about the court of public opinion, where truth mattered less than narrative, and guilt was determined by whoever told the most compelling story. And the Whittors, for all their faults, knew how to tell a story. On the fourth morning, I woke to find my Wikipedia page had been vandalized. Someone had changed my entry to read, James Alexander Hawthorne is an American billionaire and sociopath who married Claire Whitmore under false pretenses before destroying her family in an elaborate revenge scheme. It was fixed within an hour. Wikipedia's editors were efficient. But the fact that someone had done it, that someone cared enough to vandalize an encyclopedia entry, spoke to how much this story had captured people's imagination. I'd become a character, not a person, but a figure in a morality play where people could project their own beliefs about wealth, power, justice, and revenge. Some saw me as a hero, the wronged husband, the working-class guy who'd pulled himself up and then exposed the corrupt elite. Never mind that I'd never been working ass, that my MIT education and venture capital success were about as elite as it gets. The narrative needed a David versus Goliath story, so they made me David. Others saw me as a villain, the scheming billionaire who'd infiltrated a family, married their daughter under false pretenses, and then destroyed them when they didn't show proper respect. The fact that Richard had actually committed crimes became secondary to the question of my motives. The truth, as always, was more complicated than either narrative, but complexity doesn't trend on Twitter. I was reading yet another think piece, this one arguing that I represented everything wrong with billionaire culture when my phone rang. Not the cell phone that was still off, but the landline I barely remembered I had. Only 4 people had that number: Marcus, David, my parents, and Mr. Hawthorne. A woman's voice, professional, but warm. This is Jennifer Chen. I'm a producer for 60 Minutes. I know you said you weren't granting interviews, but I wanted to reach out personally to see if you'd reconsider. How did you get this number? I'm a producer for 60 Minutes, she repeated, as if that explained everything. Maybe it did. Look, I understand why you're avoiding the media circus. Most of it is garbage, hot takes, and speculation from people who don't know you or the situation. But we do long-form journalism. We tell complete stories. We could give you a chance to explain your side in your own words, unedited, with proper context. My side is in the statement I released. That was 200 words. This is a complicated situation that deserves more than 200 words. Or maybe it deserves privacy. Maybe not everything needs to be public consumption. With respect, Mr. Hawthorne, that ship sailed when your story broke. You're public now, whether you like it or not. The question is whether you want to shape that narrative or let others shape it for you. I walked to the window, my constant companion these days, and looked down at the street. The camera crews had thinned out, but hadn't disappeared entirely. A few persistent journalists remained, hoping for a shot of me leaving the building. I'll think about it, I said. That's all I ask. I'll send you some of our previous work, stories we've done on complex situations where we gave people a real platform to tell their truth. No ambushes, no gotcha journalism, just honest conversation. She gave me her email and hung up. I stood there with the dead phone in my hand, considering. Part of me wanted to say yes, wanted to sit down and explain everything. The loneliness that led to the deception, the humiliation that led to the investigation, the complexity of loving someone while being destroyed by their family. Wanted to make people understand that this wasn't a simple story of good versus evil, hero versus villain, but something messier and more human. But another part of me knew that no interview, no matter how fair or comprehensive, would satisfy everyone. Some people had decided who I was, and no amount of explanation would change their minds. I was still deciding when my phone buzzed with an email. Not from Jennifer Chen, but from an address that made my stomach drop. ClaireWhitmore@gmail.com. The subject line read, "Please read this." I opened it. James, I don't know if you're still checking this email address or if you've abandoned it along with everything else from your old life, But I'm writing this anyway because I need to say these things, and I need to believe you'll read them. First, thank you for the statement, for making it clear that I didn't know about your identity or your investigation. The media has been brutal, but it would have been worse without that. So thank you. Second, I've been thinking a lot about what you said at the restaurant, about me never standing up for you, about choosing silence over being the wife you needed. You were right. I was weak. I am weak. I've always been weak when it comes to my family. I've spent my whole life trying to earn my father's approval and my sister's respect. And somewhere in that process, I forgot how to be a person with my own spine. You deserved better. You deserved a wife who would have stood up and said, "Stop," when my father was cruel to you. Who would have defended you instead of sitting there hoping the moment would pass? Who would have chosen you over keeping the peace? I failed you long before you failed me. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. You never gave me the chance to succeed. You decided from the beginning that I couldn't be trusted with the truth, that I was too shallow or too influenced by money or too something to love the real you. You made that decision for me without me, and then spent 3 years proving yourself right. Of course, I didn't stand up for you the way you wanted. I was defending the version of you that you showed me, the struggling tech worker who needed protection, not confrontation. If I'd known you were a billionaire who could buy and sell my father 10 times over, maybe I would have been braver. Maybe I would have told Dad to off, told Madison to get over herself, told Mom to stop trying to keep peace at the expense of dignity. We'll never know because you took that choice away from me. So we're both guilty, both broken in our own ways, both responsible for how this ended. I'm signing the divorce papers tomorrow, taking the settlement even though it feels like accepting blood money, using some of it to get away from here, maybe Europe, maybe Asia, somewhere where no one knows who I am or what my family did or who I was married to. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not performing for my family or living in your shadow or trying to be the person everyone expects. I think you need to do the same thing. I hope you find peace, James. I hope the revenge was worth it. I hope you can live with what you've done and move forward without it eating you alive. And despite everything, despite the lies and the hurt and the spectacular destruction of everything we built together, I hope you know that I did love you. Maybe not well enough, maybe not bravely enough, but genuinely take care of yourself, Claire. I read the email 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of hurt and honesty and painful self-awareness. She was right about all of it. I had decided she couldn't be trusted with the truth. I'd made that judgment without evidence, based on assumptions and fears and my own damage. Had created a self-fulfilling prophecy where she couldn't defend the real me because she never knew the real me existed. We'd both failed. Both chosen self-protection over vulnerability. Both let fear determine our choices. And now, we were both alone, sorting through the wreckage, trying to figure out who we were when we weren't performing roles we'd never auditioned for. I wanted to reply, wanted to tell her I understood that I saw my own culpability clearly now, that I wished things had been different. Wanted to apologize for real this time, not in a carefully worded legal statement, but in actual human words that meant something. But what would be the point? We were still getting divorced, still ending, still walking away from 3 years of accumulated mistakes. An apology wouldn't change that. So instead, I just sat with her words, let them settle into the space where anger and righteousness had been living. Felt something shift inside me that might have been the beginning of forgiveness for her, for myself, for both of us. Marcus showed up at my door around noon carrying lunch and the determined expression of someone who wasn't taking no for an answer. "You look like shit," he said, pushing past me into the apartment. "When's the last time you showered? Yesterday? Maybe the day before?" Jesus, James. He unpacked sandwiches and chips on my kitchen counter. You can't hermit yourself to death. That's not how this works. How does this work? Because I don't have a manual for what to do when your life becomes a media spectacle. You come out. Face it. Stop hiding like you did something wrong. I did do something wrong. Multiple things. I lied to my wife for 3 years. I destroyed her family. You exposed criminals, Marcus interrupted. You ended a fraud. You stood up for yourself after being treated like garbage. Stop letting guilt override the legitimate parts of what you did. I took the sandwich he offered. Turkey and avocado, my favorite, because Marcus paid attention to things like that. Claire emailed me and she's right about everything. I never gave her a chance to love the real me. I decided she couldn't handle it and made that decision for both of us. Okay, so you learned something. That's good. That's growth. What are you going to do with that lesson? Not make the same mistake again, I guess, if there's ever an again? Marcus bit into his sandwich, chewed thoughtfully. There will be. You're 30 years old and worth $750 million. There will definitely be an again. The question is whether you'll be ready for it. I don't think I want an again. Not for a long time, maybe ever. That's the hurt talking. Give it time. We ate in silence for a while. The comfortable kind of silence that comes from years of friendship. Outside, the city continued its midday rhythm, oblivious to my personal drama. The board wants to meet, Marcus said eventually. Silver Line's board. They're concerned about the publicity, about how this reflects on the company, concerned that their CEO orchestrated the downfall of his father-in-law, concerned that their CEO might be distracted, that this personal situation might affect business decisions, that the media attention might impact investor confidence. I set down my sandwich, appetite gone. They want me to step down. They want reassurance that you're still focused, still capable, still the person they trust to run a $2 billion company. And if I can't give them that reassurance, Marcus met my eyes, then yeah, they might ask you to step down temporarily until things settle. The idea should have terrified me. Silverline was my legacy, my creation, the thing I'd built when I was barely old enough to drink legally. It was my identity in ways that went beyond money or status. But instead of terror, I felt nothing. Just more of that same emptiness that had been following me since New Year's Eve. Maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing, I said quietly. What? Maybe I need to step back, take time, figure out who I am when I'm not building companies or hiding identities or orchestrating revenge. Just be for a while. Marcus looked at me like I'd suggested joining a cult. You want to just be you, the guy who started his first company at 19, who hasn't taken a vacation longer than 4 days in his entire adult life? I want to stop running from loneliness, from connection, from myself. And maybe the only way to do that is to actually stop everything for a while. Where would you go? I thought about it. About Claire's email mentioning Europe or Asia, about my mother's offer to come home to Vermont, about all the places I'd traveled for business but never really seen because I was always working, always building, always moving forward to avoid looking too closely at what was behind. I don't know. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one knows who I am or what I did. Somewhere I can just exist without performing. That's not how the world works anymore, James. You're recognizable now. Your face has been on every news channel. Someone will always know who you are. Then, somewhere remote, an island, a mountain, a place where strangers are too polite to approach and Wi-Fi is too unreliable to check Twitter. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying me with those analytical eyes that had seen through my since freshman year of college. You're serious about this? I think I am. What about the divorce, the legal stuff, Richard's trial when it happens? David can handle the divorce. The trial doesn't need me. I'm not testifying, not involved beyond being the person who reported the crimes. I can do all of it remotely. And Silverline, you can run it. You've been doing half the work anyway. Make it official. Tell the board I'm taking a leave of absence for health reasons. Mental health is health, right? And God knows mine could use some attention. He didn't argue, didn't try to talk me out of it, just nodded slowly, accepting. How long? I don't know, 6 months, a year, however long it takes to feel human again. Okay. He stood up, started cleaning up the lunch debris. Okay. If that's what you need, we'll make it work. But James, yeah, don't disappear completely. Stay in touch. Let me know you're alive and not becoming a hermit who lives in a cave and talks to seagulls or whatever. Despite everything, I laughed. I promised to limit my seagull conversations. After he left, I sat in my apartment and felt something I hadn't felt in days. Possibility. Not happiness, not relief, but the sense that maybe there was a path forward that didn't involve hiding or fighting or performing. Maybe I could just go leave New York and the media circus and the constant weight of public opinion. Find somewhere quiet and figure out how to be James. Not Hawthorne or Hathaway, not billionaire or husband or villain or hero. Just James. A person flawed and complicated and trying to do better. I pulled up my laptop and started searching. Remote locations, places where privacy was valued and strangers were rare. Islands off Scotland, villages in New Zealand, mountain towns in Switzerland. Places where I could breathe without being watched, where I could think without being judged, where I could maybe finally figure out who I actually was when I wasn't trying to be anyone at all. My phone buzzed. Another message. This one from David. Claire signed the papers. Divorce is official pending the mandatory waiting period. She also asked me to tell you something. Tell him I forgive him, and I hope he forgives me too. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling something crack open in my chest. Not quite forgiveness, not quite peace, but maybe the beginning of both. I typed back, tell her I do, and I hope she finds what she's looking for. Then I turned off my phone for the last time in this chapter of my life and started planning my escape. Not from consequences, those would follow me anywhere, but from the noise, the attention, the constant need to explain or defend or justify. I was done performing. It was time to figure out what came after the curtain fell. I left New York on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after New Year's Eve. The flight to Reykjavik departed at 6 a.m., early enough that the city was still dark, still quiet, still half asleep. I took a car service to JFK, watching Manhattan skyline recede in the rearview mirror like a memory I was already starting to forget. No one recognized me at the airport. I'd grown a beard, let my hair get longer, wore glasses I didn't need, and clothes that cost a fraction of what was in my closet. I looked like a graduate student heading home after the holidays, not a billionaire fleeing a scandal. The anonymity felt like a gift. Iceland was supposed to be temporary, a stopover, a place to catch my breath before moving on to somewhere more permanent. But when I landed in Reykjavik and felt the bite of Arctic wind and saw the vast emptiness of winter landscape, something in me settled. This was far enough, remote enough, different enough. I rented a small house on the outskirts of the city, barely more than a cottage, really, with a view of the ocean and mountains in the distance. The rental agent didn't ask questions. Icelanders, I was learning, valued privacy the way Americans valued success, as a fundamental right, not something you had to earn or explain. The first week, I did nothing. Slept 12 hours a day, ate simple food from the corner market, walked along the shore when the weather permitted, which wasn't often in January. Let my mind go blank for the first time in years. No email, no news, no checking to see what people were saying about me or how the Whitmore trial was progressing or whether Claire had made it to wherever she was going. Just silence and cold, and the particular kind of solitude that comes from being truly, completely alone. By the second week, I started feeling human again, not happy. Happiness felt like a distant country I'd heard about but never visited, but present, aware, capable of experiencing moments without immediately analyzing or strategizing or performing some version of myself for an invisible audience. I started cooking. Real cooking, not just reheating takeout. Found recipes online and attempted them with varying degrees of success. Burned a fish stew so badly the smoke alarm went off. Made lamb that was actually decent. Discovered I liked the process, the focus it required, the tangible results, the simple satisfaction of feeding myself something I'd created. I started writing, too. Not the confessional document I had written in New York, but something different. Observations about the landscape, thoughts about solitude, reflections on the difference between loneliness and being alone. Nothing I planned to publish or share, just words for myself. The beginning of a conversation with the person I was trying to become. And I started thinking. Really thinking about what I wanted, not what I should want. Not what would look good or sound impressive or satisfy some external measure of success, but what would actually make me feel like my life meant something beyond accumulation and achievement. The answer surprised me. I didn't want another company. Didn't want to go back to the endless cycle of meetings and strategies and growth targets. Silverline would be fine with Marcus running it. Better than fine, probably. I didn't want revenge anymore. The satisfaction had lasted all of 3 seconds before curdling into something that tasted like ash. Richard would face trial, would probably go to prison, would lose everything he'd spent his life building. That was enough. More than enough. I didn't want to hide anymore either. Not my identity, not my wealth, not any part of who I actually was. The performance had nearly killed me. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. I was done being two people. What I wanted was simpler and somehow harder. I wanted to matter. Not for my money or my success or my dramatic life story, but for something real. Something that helped people or solved problems or made the world marginally less broken. I just didn't know what that looked like yet. On day 21, I turned my phone on for the first time since leaving New York. The messages flooded in, hundreds of them, weeks of accumulated communication demanding my attention. But I ignored most of them, scrolling until I found the ones that mattered. Marcus, company's fine. Board accepted your leave. Take your time. The Seagull's treating you well, David. Divorce finalized. Settlement transferred. Claire sent a note saying she's in Barcelona teaching. English seems happy. You good? My mother, wherever you are, I hope you're taking care of yourself. Call when you're ready. We love you. And one more from an email address I didn't recognize, but a name I remembered. Thomas Brennan, the former Whitmore employee who'd reached out after the scandal broke. Wanted you to know. Gave my testimony to federal investigators. They're building a case not just against Richard, but the whole corrupt culture at Whitmore Industries. Your exposure of the fraud opened the door for a dozen other victims to come forward. We're finally being heard. Thank you for that. I read that one twice, feeling something warm and unfamiliar in my chest. Not pride, exactly, but something adjacent to it. The sense that maybe some good had come from the destruction. That the collateral damage had included liberation for people who'd been suffering in silence. It didn't erase the hurt I'd caused. Claire didn't make my deception noble or justified, but it reminded me that actions have ripples, and not all of them are destructive. I typed 3 responses to Marcus. Seagulls are judgmental, but honest. Better company than most billionaires. Talk soon. To David, I'm good. Getting better. Glad Claire's okay. Thank you for everything. To my mother, I'm in Iceland. I'm safe. I'm figuring things out. Love you too. Then I turned the phone off again and walked down to the shore where the wind was brutal and the water was dark and the horizon stretched endlessly in every direction. I stood there for a long time feeling small and insignificant in the best possible way. Just one person on one island on one planet spinning through space. Not a billionaire or a villain or a victim or a hero. Just James, 30 years old, trying to figure out what came next. The wind numbed my face. The waves crashed against black sand. And somewhere inside me, something that had been clenched tight for 3 years finally started to unfold. This was healing. Slow and cold and uncomfortable, but real. And for the first time since New Year's Eve, I felt something that might have been hope. 6 months later, I was sitting in a cafe in Reykjavik when I saw her. Not Claire. I'd learned to stop seeing Claire and every blonde woman who passed by. This was someone different, a woman about my age struggling with the laptop and what looked like grant applications. Her frustration evident in the way she kept sighing and running her hands through her hair. "The Wi-Fi here is terrible," she said suddenly, catching me watching. Her accent was local. You'd think in 2026 we could manage consistent internet, but no. "Have you tried the corner by the window?" I offered better signal. She moved, tested it, smiled when it worked. "Thank you. You're a lifesaver." We talked. Just small talk at first. What brought me to Iceland? I said I was taking time off, which was true enough. What she did? Marine biology research, studying climate change impacts on fishing populations. Then deeper conversation, her passion for her work, my admission that I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. "How old are you?" she asked. 30. "You have time. Most people spend their whole lives not knowing what they want. At least you're asking the question." When she left, she gave me her card, Dr. Christine Sigurd, our daughter, an email address. "If you ever want to talk about marine conservation funding, let me know. We're always looking for investors who actually care about the work." I held the card for a long time. After she left that night, I made a decision. I called Marcus, told him I was ready to come back. Not to running Silverline, but to something new. A foundation focused on environmental conservation and exposing corporate corruption, using my resources to amplify voices like Thomas Brennan's, like Kristen's, like all the people doing important work without the platforms or funding to make it matter. "So, you're becoming a philanthropist?" Marcus asked. "I'm becoming someone who stops hiding, who uses what he has to do something that matters." "Is that philanthropy?" "Maybe. I just know I can't keep running." "About time," he said. "When are you coming home?" I looked out at the Icelandic night, at the darkness that somehow felt less lonely than it had 6 months ago. "Soon," I said. "But Marcus, I think I'm going to keep the beard." He laughed. We talked logistics, strategy, the future, and for the first time since throwing wine-stained clothes on a bathroom floor, I felt like I was moving towards something instead of away from it. The Whitmores had taught me what I didn't want to be. Iceland had taught me how to be still. Now it was time to learn how to be useful. Not for redemption, not for revenge, not even for forgiveness. Just for the simple, radical act of showing up as myself and seeing what I could build from the ruins. The beginning, I realized, always looks a lot like an ending until you start moving forward.